It's late, and you've made it through another day with a heart that's been carrying too much for far too long. So before the silence stretches wide, before the sleep takes you under, you are welcome here, not in words, but in breath. This is a place where monks walk slowly, and no one asks what you've done to deserve peace. A candle has been waiting for you. It's already lit, and the floor, soft with silence, already knows the weight of what you're not saying. So, rest your thoughts beside the door. They will be safe there. For now, you do not need to think. You do not need to try. You only need to listen, to feel, to arrive as you are. You carry more than your body admits. Stress curled beneath your ribs, grief tucked inside your breath, regret that replays in quiet loops. But you are not your weight. You are not your worry. You are not the noise that visits you in the dark. You are the one who made it here. Let that be enough for now. The monks do not hurry their healing. They walk in circles, breathe with the bell, and trust the sky to turn without their asking. You too may stop asking. You do not have to name the ache. It has already been recognized. Here, there is no audience, no performance, no need to pretend that it doesn't still hurt. You are welcome with the pain, not in spite of it. So breathe softly, not like a task, like a return. Inhale the truth. You've done enough for today. Exhale the effort. You don't have to hold all of it anymore. You don't need to fix anything tonight. You don't need to finish healing. You only need to be here, inside the breath, inside the warmth, inside this temple that lives wherever you let it. The monks don't ask your name. They see the soul behind the storm, and they know you've traveled long enough carrying what was never truly yours. You may set it down now. There is a breath that doesn't rise from your lungs but from somewhere older. It does not rush. It does not explain itself. It does not arrive to prove anything. It simply moves, like wind through trees that never ask to be understood. That breath is with you now, and it's softer than the one you've been surviving on. Let it fill the spaces you forgot were yours. Let it reach beneath the armor. Let it remind you, you do not have to try so hard to be whole. You've confused exhaustion with failure, but they are not the same. You are not broken, only overused, only stretched across too many yesterdays without a quiet place to return to. Let this be that place. You don't have to name your shame here. You don't have to fix your craving or soothe the voice that says you're not enough. Here, even craving can rest. Even longing can sit beside you without being punished. The monks don't silence the ache. They bow to it. They treat it like a visitor who needs a warm floor and nothing more. So bow not out of discipline, but out of mercy. Bow to your own tiredness, to the sleepless parts of you that only wanted to feel safe. Tonight, you are safe. Not because the world is quiet, but because you have chosen not to chase its noise anymore. You are allowed to want nothing. You are allowed to stop holding yourself together. You are allowed to be undone in sacred ways. The breath that you carry now is the one that carries you. No more proving, no more posture, no more perfect timing for healing. Even the cracked bowl still holds the warm tea. Even the flickering candle still gives light. Even you as you are can be enough to bless the silence. Breathe again, not deeply, but honestly. Let it enter. Let it leave. Let it soften what the mind cannot touch. There is no destination. Only this moment, and this one, and this one. The monks outside are still sweeping. But now, you are sweeping too. Not the floor, but the corners of your being where old expectations gathered dust. Let it go. Let it be unimportant. There is no greater prayer than the exhale that asks for nothing. No more holding breath for answers. No more tightening against what might not come. Let the breath come and go like a guest you've stopped questioning. And if something sacred begins to move in you, not loud, not clear, but gentle, like a wind wrapped in silk, let it. This, too, is part of the letting. You've made it to the place beneath trying. You are not here to awaken. You are here to stop running from rest. Tonight, you don't rise like a mountain. You sink like the moon into the water without a sound. That is enough. That is peace. That is the breath before letting go. It began with beauty. Not the loud kind, not the kind that demands to be seen, but the quiet kind, a single petal floating down through a sky that wasn't asking to be watched. You saw it, that soft curve of pink, weightless, drifting, falling without fear, moving like it belonged to the air more than the branch it came from. And before you could think, your hand reached out, not out of greed, not even out of desire, but something deeper, something aching. A whisper that said, "If I don't catch it, I'll lose it forever." The petal was never yours, but the moment felt like it could be, and so your hand closed too soon, too fast, too tightly. And what had been soft was suddenly crushed. This is how it happens, not in malice, not in harm, but in the sacred panic of wanting to hold what was always meant to pass through. You didn't mean to hurt it, you only wanted to keep it. But your fingers forgot that love is not a cage, and the soul of beauty cannot breathe when trapped. How many things have you closed your hand around in hopes that they would stay? How many people, moments, versions of yourself that were already leaving? We do not grieve only what leaves. We grieve what we tried to hold when it was already in flight. You were not wrong for reaching. That's what hearts do. But the sorrow comes not from the petal falling, but from believing that you were supposed to stop it. The monks tell a story of a young disciple who tried to collect all the blossoms before the wind arrived. He gathered them in his robe, pressed them close to his chest, rushed from branch to branch with fear in his eyes. The elder watched in silence. And when the disciple finally collapsed, arms full of broken petals and wilted dreams, the elder whispered, "Nothing stays just because you close your hand around it." The boy wept, not for the flowers, but for how tightly he'd held them. Can you see it now? Grief isn't always about loss. Sometimes it's about the way we held on. Sometimes it's about the small belief that if we had loved better, they would have stayed. But that's not how petals work. That's not how wind moves. That's not how life was ever meant to be owned. You are not weak for reaching. You are only human. But tonight, you are allowed to unclench. You are allowed to remember that some things drift so they can return in another form. The petal you missed may still live in the air. The love that left may have only changed shape. You do not have to catch what is already free. You only have to feel it as it passes through your palm. There's something sorrowful about a hand that remembers too much. Even when it's still, even when the fingers have stopped reaching, there's a tension left in the palm, a ghost of something once held too tightly. Your hand may be open now, but it remembers the moment it closed. It remembers the warmth that slipped through, the breath you forgot to take, the fear that rose faster than trust. You didn't mean to hold on like that. You were just afraid. Afraid of change. Afraid of absence. Afraid that if you didn't hold it now, you would never feel it again. You thought love meant grasping. That to care deeply was to never let go. But even the sacred must be allowed to move. Even the most beautiful things are not here to be preserved like relics, but witnessed like sunrise. Have you ever tried to hold a sunset in your hands? It burns. Not because the light is cruel, but because it was never meant to be touched. The monks say, to chase the petal is to forget the tree that offered it. Sometimes it was enough that something beautiful passed your way at all. It doesn't mean you failed when it left. It doesn't mean you were unworthy of its staying. It simply means its nature was movement. But we fear movement, don't we? not the physical kind, but the emotional kind, the letting go of how things were. That is the deeper grief. Not what we lost, but the version of us that no longer makes sense without it. You've looked at your own reflection and asked why it feels different now, as if loss rewrites the shape of your face, as if grief has its own gravity and pulls even the self inward. And maybe it does, because when you close your hand too soon, you don't just crush what you love, you bruise the part of you that trusted love could stay. That bruise lingers, not where others can see it, but in the part of you that hesitates now, the part that flinches when joy gets too close, the part that fears beauty because it might leave again. You've become careful, too careful. Where once your heart reached freely, now it asks for guarantees. It whispers, will this stay? Will this love be loyal? Will this one not disappear when I soften? But petals do not make promises. They simply fall when the season tells them to. The pain, then, is not in the falling. It's in the mind that believes falling is betrayal. Nothing betrayed you, only the illusion that love must remain unchanged to be real. Can you sit with that? Not to fix it, not to rise above it, but to let it breathe inside you without defense. The monks say, a hand that stays open becomes a garden for whatever visits. And so tonight, you are asked to become a garden, not a wall, not a vault, not a closed fist full of past regrets. A garden, open, unknowing, willing to feel the wind and not call it a threat. Let it move through you now. Let the memory of what you tried to hold become petals on the wind. They will not return, but they may bless the soil. You may notice, beneath the ache, something gentle beginning, a forgiveness not of the other but of yourself. Forgiveness for closing too soon, for trying too hard, for believing that effort could outpace impermanence. You didn't fail, you feared, and fear is only the shadow of attachment. Love, without attachment, doesn't cling. It cups gently, it receives, it blesses, it lets go with the same grace as it welcomes. You are not far from this love. You've simply forgotten its rhythm. Let yourself remember now. Not all at once, not perfectly, but slowly, like water remembering it can soften stone. There was once a monk who sat by the river each morning and let a single leaf fall into his palm. He would hold it until the wind asked for it back. And when it did, he released it not because he didn't care, but because he did. He said, love is not how long I hold it. Love is how freely I let it go when it asks to be free. You may not be there yet. That's all right. You don't need to release everything tonight. Only the need to control its return. That's enough. That's the beginning. Grieving is not failure. It's the echo of care. It's the proof that your heart still opens, even when it knows it may close again. And sometimes, that's the most courageous thing a soul can do. To open again, even knowing, even remembering, even trembling. So now, ask yourself not as punishment, but as permission. What have you been holding that already asked to go? What petals are you still clinging to long after the season has changed? What love have you measured by how long it stayed, instead of how fully it touched your life before the wind came? Let these questions walk beside you, not as interrogations, but as soft companions on the road back to yourself. Tonight, your hand may not open all the way, but even a crack lets the light return. Even a loosened grip can become a prayer. And if you listen, you may feel it. The wind. It hasn't left you. It never did. It was only waiting for you to stop chasing, to stop closing, to stop confusing possession with presence. Let it pass through now. Let it carry the last fragments of effort. You are not losing. You are returning. The hand that once closed too soon can learn to open again, not with fear, but with reverence. And if you open it now, you might notice something strange. The petal was never the point. It was the moment, and the moment is still here, still breathing with you, still waiting to be held with nothing but presence, not caught, not kept, just held like silence holding a single falling note, not forever, just for now. And now, you are free to uncurl, not into light, not into certainty, but into the soft shape of someone who no longer rushes to keep what is already becoming sky. It wasn't just the pain, it was the voice that followed, the one that asked, "Why did this happen?" followed too quickly by, "Why did you let it?" You were already hurting. But then the questions came, not curious, cruel, not seeking understanding, but someone to hold responsible, and that someone was always you. Somewhere along the path, you learned to aim the second arrow at yourself. The first one struck a breakup, a betrayal, a sudden loss, an ache with no clear name. And before your breath could return, you reached for the second arrow, not out of need, but out of habit. You blamed yourself for not seeing it coming, for not being stronger, for crying, for not moving on faster. But the monks say, the first arrow wounds the body, the second wounds the soul, and it is the second one that takes the longest to remove. There is a story they tell deep in the still places of a monk who came to the elder, eyes red with pain. "I've failed," he said. "I should have known better. I should have done better." The elder poured tea, silent, slow, and placed a bowl of water between them. Then, wordlessly, he dropped an arrow into the bowl. The arrow floated, then softened, then slowly unraveled into nothing. "This is the second arrow," he said. "It dissolves when you stop trying to hold it. You've been holding it, not because you wanted to, but because you thought it made you responsible. You mistook blame for growth. You thought punishing yourself meant you were evolving. But pain is not proof that you're doing something wrong, and suffering longer doesn't make you more worthy of healing. You don't have to stay pierced just because you were hurt once. You can remove the second arrow, even now. Even if it's been there for years. Even if your mind carved its initials into the wood. You are not weak for feeling pain. You are not broken because the first arrow found you. It happens to all of us. The fall, the silence, the unexpected goodbye, the long night of no reason, but none of that is your fault. Pain is not a punishment. It's a signal, and it passes if we let it move without attaching guilt to it. Tonight, you are invited to let it move, not by forcing, not by forgetting, but by placing it gently into the bowl of your own breath. Let it dissolve. Let the second arrow finally rest. You've been strong enough. You've survived the wound. You don't need to survive the blame too. You've become skilled at hurting yourself without a blade. The world gave you a wound, and you gave yourself the shame. This is the second arrow, and unlike the first, you did not cry out when it pierced you. You nodded, you agreed, you whispered, "I deserve this." But pain does not require permission to arrive, and neither does healing. Some wounds come with no warning, no karma, no lesson, just life in its sharp, untamed rhythm. The first arrow is honest. It stings, but it tells the truth. You are alive. The second arrow lies. It tells you the pain is your fault, that you are weak for feeling it, that if only you had done something differently, none of this would have happened. That arrow is made of thought, not wood, and it sinks deeper the more you believe it belongs inside you. But it doesn't. It never did. There is a place within you where arrows do not stick, where blame cannot live, where pain moves through like water through reeds felt, but not held. To reach that place, you must stop speaking to yourself in the voice of punishment. You must stop narrating your own suffering as if it proves something. You have nothing left to prove. You are not in court. You are in a monastery now, and here no one is counting how long you grieve. No one is measuring your growth by your guilt. In this sacred silence, pain is not shameful. It is simply seen. So let's return to the bowl, the one filled with still water, the one the elder monk placed before his student. Imagine it now. The surface is smooth, like glass, unmoved by storm or story. You take the second arrow, not physically, but in awareness, and you hold it above the bowl. It's heavy, not with metal, but with memory. Every should have, every if only. Every night you rewound the pain to see where you could have dodged it. All of it is etched into this arrow. And now, you lower it into the water. Not fast, not with drama, but like a ceremony, a slow surrender. At first, it resists. That's what blame does, it clings. But water has no argument. It only receives. The arrow begins to soften, to fade, to unwrite itself. And in its dissolving, you feel it. The grief without the guilt, the sadness without the shame, the rawness without the narrative. This is the beginning of compassion, not for others, for yourself. You are not only the one who was hurt, you are the one who kept hurting yourself because you didn't know what else to do. But you know now. You know that every time you said, "I shouldn't feel this way," you drove the second arrow deeper. You know that every time you compared your pain to someone else's and found yourself lacking, you made healing take the longer road. You know that silence was never the punishment but the medicine you delayed because you feared what it might reveal. Let it reveal this. You were never the reason for the first arrow, and you do not deserve the second. There is a monk who walks alone at dusk, carrying no lantern, only a small bowl of water in his hands. He walks through the village quietly, looking at the faces of those who have not yet forgiven themselves. When he finds one, he does not speak. He only kneels and offers the bowl. Some take it, some pour their sorrows into it, some refuse, some ask, "What good is a bowl of water?" And the monk says only this: "It will not take your pain, but it will show you which part of it was never yours to carry." This story is not old. It is happening now. You are the one with sorrow in your hands, and you are the one holding the bowl, both, which means you can choose. You can dip your ache into stillness. You can let the second arrow dissolve in something quieter than your thoughts. And when the thoughts return, because they will, you need not fight them. You only need to hold the bowl again and let the water do what it always does. Receive, soften, release. It is not your job to stop all pain. It is only your task to stop turning pain into identity. You are not what happened to you. You are not what you failed to prevent. You are not the sum of your imagined mistakes. You are the one watching the arrows fall. And that watcher is already free. Breathe with that. Let it become your rhythm. Let it become the place where thought and feeling no longer compete for meaning. The monks say, the first arrow teaches, the second delays the lesson. So put down the delay, put down the punishment, put down the habit of self-attack. It will feel unfamiliar, but only at first. Then it will feel like relief, like quiet, like the sound of wind through open windows no longer blocked by guilt. You don't have to rush this. The arrow dissolves slowly. Let it take the time it needs. Healing isn't hurried, it's heard, it's held, it's honored without explanation. If the tears come, let them. If the memories rise, watch them, but hold nothing, catch nothing, crush nothing. Let this be the night you stop being the one who wounds yourself in the name of growth. There is no badge for carrying unnecessary pain. There is no gold for punishing the soft parts of you. The elder monk once said, when you remove the second arrow, you do not become invincible, you become available to peace. So make yourself available, not to perfection, not to forgetting, but to the sacred possibility that pain can pass without becoming a prison. Let tonight be the beginning. Let the bowl rest beside you. Let the water know what to do. Let the arrow, at last, lose its shape, not because you forced it, but because you no longer believed it needed to stay. And when morning comes, if it comes gently, with no reason, with no voice, let that be your answer. Let that be the proof. You did not need to keep hurting to honor the wound. You only needed to remember how to be soft in the places you once hardened to survive. The arrow dissolves, and so does the story. You remain, still here, still breathing, still whole without the pain that once convinced you you weren't. They didn't throw it away. The bowl had split, right along the side, a quiet fracture, thin as breath, deep as memory. It had held tea for generations, and now its silence had been broken. The younger monks whispered, "It's ruined. It will leak. It can't be trusted now." But the elder didn't flinch. He lifted the bowl in both hands as if it still held warmth, and he smiled, the way only someone does when they've lived long enough to know that breakage isn't the end of use, just the start of a different kind of beauty. He sent for the gold, not to cover the crack, but to fill it, molten, careful, sacred. He traced the broken path not with shame, but reverence. And when the gold cooled, the crack became a river of light, not hidden, not erased, made holy. They poured tea into it that evening, and it held. Not despite the wound, but through it. You are like that bowl. You've cracked in places you thought would shatter you completely. You've lost people, faced silences, endured changes that broke something you didn't know had a name. And yet, you're still here, still able to hold warmth, even if your hands tremble, even if your voice has changed. There's a sorrow in you that's quiet now, but it remembers. And sometimes, when you sit too still, it echoes. You don't have to hide that, not here. In this monastery, we place the broken bowls on the highest shelves, not because they are fragile, but because they are revered. Each one tells a story not of flaw, but of having survived. Do you see the gold running through your life? Not the victories, not the moments others applauded, but the nights you chose not to vanish, the mornings you rose with tired breath and still made tea for your sorrow, the way you kept loving when you weren't sure you had anything left to give. Those are your gold lines. Not shiny, but sacred. The monks say, a crack is where the light insists on entering. It is also where memory leaves gently. You don't need to be restored to what you were before the breaking. That version of you was whole, yes, but it did not know how to carry this kind of gentleness, this kind of wisdom, this kind of sacred grief. You do now. Let that be enough. Tonight, you are not being asked to pretend, not to pretend that it didn't hurt, not to pretend that you're fully healed, not to pretend that you'd choose the pain again. You're only being asked to hold yourself the way the elder held the bowl, soft, certain, without rush, no fixing, just filling, with gold, with warmth, with breath. You may always carry the shape of that crack, but you do not have to see it as damage. Not anymore. You are not broken. You are lined. There are days you don't touch the cracked places. You walk around them, dress over them, laugh through them, call yourself healed because the light hasn't touched the fault line in a while. But healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering, without collapsing, without shame. There's a difference between being broken and being changed. And what happened to you did change you. There are parts of your soul that now curve differently. Edges softened, walls thinned, thresholds moved. Not because you chose to evolve, but because life poured itself into you with no warning and no apology. The ones who survive such pouring don't walk the same. They echo a little when they move. Their silences are deeper, Their warmth comes slower, but steadier. And yes, sometimes the world forgets that you are still a bowl. It looks for perfection, shiny porcelain, unmarked, untouched. But here, in this sacred place, we know better. Here, the monks don't pour tea into perfect bowls. They pour into the ones with gold, because those are the ones that know how to hold it. Do you know what it means to be trusted even in your cracked form? It means you are still worthy, still able, still open. You've lived through the shattering and still offer warmth to others. You smile, even with the memory of breaking pressed like a fingerprint into the center of your chest. You give, even with a history of loss sitting quietly behind your eyes. That is not weakness. That is sacred architecture. That is spirit made visible in the shape of a soul that did not close. Let the warmth find you tonight, not because you've earned it, not because you've healed everything, but because you're here, and that is the only qualification the monks have ever asked. You are not disqualified from peace because you cracked. You are not unwelcome to joy because you bled. You are not outside the temple because your voice sometimes shakes when you say your own name. You are the temple, and the crack, it is the doorway. Have you ever noticed how the warmest tea is often poured for the guest who looks the most tired? You are that guest, and the tea is ready. So, let yourself receive. Let the warmth settle into the fractures. Let it rise up into the spaces you've been holding too tightly. Let it steam across your chest and remind you that softness still lives here, that not everything must be mended to be meaningful, that not every wound must disappear before it becomes holy. The elder monk once said, "Do not call the crack a flaw. Call it the path the light has chosen." So tonight, do not curse your tenderness. Do not hide the part of you that still hurts when you remember. Instead, cup yourself in your own hands, as if you are the bowl, not to analyze, not to improve, just to feel. You have held so much. You have endured so long. You have walked bravely, even with the fracture still glowing gold down the center of your life. Let someone, even if only silence, pour into you now. Let this breath be warm. Let this stillness be safe. Let this night be the one where you stop trying to become whole by erasing the evidence that you were ever broken. You don't need to erase it. You need to honor it. Let the gold show. Let the crack glisten. Let the warmth rise like memory but without the ache. You are not what broke you. You are what remained. And what remained was strong enough to shine. There is one final thing the monks do before placing the bowl back on the shelf. They bow, not to the bowl, but to the story it carries. So, now, bow to yourself. Not as a gesture of pride, but of reverence. You didn't have to survive this, but you did. And you didn't have to remain kind, but you did. That alone makes your presence sacred. And if, by chance, you still wonder whether you are worthy to be held, to be poured into, to be loved, remember this. The tea never judged the bowl. It simply entered and made it warm. So now, close your eyes like a vessel. Let yourself be filled. And if anything spills, let it be peace. It grew where nothing was supposed to. No hands had tilled the soil. No seeds had been laid with ceremony. No water had been brought from the well. And yet, in the crack between two old stones, soft green began to rise, a stem, then another, then color, a bloom the shape of quiet joy, delicate, unapologetic, free from anyone's plan. The monks saw it first on their morning walk, and they did not touch it. They simply bowed, not out of surprise, but out of understanding. Not everything beautiful requires effort. Not everything sacred needs a gardener. The flower was enough. The crack was enough. The growth had its own rhythm. You've tried so long to grow yourself like a project. You've watered your wounds with expectation. You've monitored every inch of your progress, tied your worth to how much you've healed, and asked the mirror if it's finally time to be proud. But the most effortless growth never announces itself. It happens when you're busy breathing, when you're not looking, when you've finally stopped trying to make things bloom on your timeline. Your soul is like that stone wall, old in places, weathered, mossy with memories, but still there is a crack, and from it, something soft is already reaching for the sun, even now. Even if you haven't noticed, even if you've been too busy fixing yourself to feel how far you've already come without trying. The monks have a word for this: non-doing. It doesn't mean passivity, it means trust. It means allowing what is already within you to unfold without being forced. You don't need to pull at the petals to make them open. You don't need to pry the ground apart to demand roots. Growth happens in silence, in sleep, in the spaces where the light sneaks in and the mind finally quiets. How many times have you thought, I should be farther along by now, as if blooming were a race, as if your beauty were behind schedule? There is no schedule here, only seasons, only shifts, only soft invitations to rest while something deeper rearranges itself inside you. Tonight, you are not being asked to grow. You are being reminded that you already are. You are not broken. You are in bloom. Not loudly, not urgently, but steadily. Like a flower that never once asked if it was worthy of sunlight. Let yourself feel that, not as permission, but as truth. You do not need to fix your pain to deserve peace. You do not need to solve yourself before you are allowed to sleep well. There is a garden inside you that does not respond to punishment. It responds to warmth, to slowness, to being left alone long enough for the wildflowers to find their own path to the surface. No one taught the flower how to bloom. It didn't attend a lesson. It didn't ask for approval. It simply rose because the soil was ready, because the rain had passed, because the sun showed up on its own. What if your healing is like that? What if the moments you've judged as wasted were the very ones softening the ground? What if you are not late, but exactly where spring begins? You've asked yourself too often, what am I not doing enough of? But perhaps the better question is, what am I doing too much of that keeps my healing from breathing? Too much pressure, too much self-comparison, too much storytelling about how broken you must be to need this much time. But the earth has never rushed its roots. The forest does not hurry its green. There are days when nothing visible happens. And yet, everything is changing beneath the surface. You are not behind. You are underground. And under the ground, magic is silent. You may not feel it yet, the peace, the arrival, the softness you've been craving. But that doesn't mean it isn't blooming inside you. It just means your eyes have been trained to see effort instead of evidence. Tonight, shift your gaze inward, not to evaluate, to witness. Can you feel it? The slight spaciousness where tightness used to live. The way your breath goes deeper now before retreating. The moments when the voice of self-judgment grows tired before you do. That is growth. That is the wildflower. Not grand, but real. Not loud, but lasting. The monks speak of a hidden path, a trail that leads through moss and stone, winding behind the old bell tower, where no one walks. And in that forgotten stretch, there is a patch of wild green, soft blossoms, untended, perfect. It was never planted, it was never pruned, and yet it thrives. The elder once said, "This is where the soul reminds us we were born to bloom without permission." You don't need permission either. Not to rest, not to feel joy, not to begin again without cleaning up the past. The garden does not ask what came before. It only opens when the light returns. So what if you stop pushing tonight? What if you stop organizing your healing like a project with deadlines? What if you simply make space? What if your job is not to grow yourself, but to remove what blocks your bloom? The soil knows what to do. It has always known. So does your heart. Even when it feels uncertain, even when it forgets, there's a quiet intelligence within you that rises in stillness. But it cannot be heard when you are yelling at yourself to change. Let it rise now, like sap rising through bark, like breath returning after grief, like color where once there was only gray. Let it happen without agenda. There is nothing you must figure out tonight, no thought you must defeat, no pattern you must perfect. You are already in motion, not because you are forcing forward, but because the very act of resting is its own kind of movement. There is a garden growing in the unspoken, in the silence between your attempts, in the breath you take just before trying again and then deciding not to. Even surrender can bloom something beautiful. You've been taught to equate discipline with control, but the truest discipline is trust. To trust that what is within you does not need to be chased, only witnessed, only allowed. When the monks prepare the tea garden, they do not add color. They do not trim for symmetry. They remove what doesn't belong. They clear space for beauty to arrive. That's all. Maybe tonight, that is all that's being asked of you. To clear a little space, to let the stone crack again and see if anything grows there. To believe that wildflowers know more about healing than your perfectionism ever did. You have not failed. You have simply been gardening in a way that forgot the garden already existed. You don't need a new self. You need a gentler one. The one that doesn't wake up and immediately evaluate your progress. The one that doesn't measure your worth by how much peace you can prove. The one that opens slowly, unfolding like a petal that no longer fears being seen before it's ready. You are ready. Not for everything, but for this breath, for this softness, for this beginning. Let that be enough. Let this night be the soil where something roots quietly. You do not need to know what it is. You only need to stop pulling at the ground before it has time to bloom. And if nothing comes yet, if it's all still silence and shadow and stone, then bless the waiting. Even the waiting is part of the garden. There's an old saying carved near the bamboo gate. The flower does not know it is beautiful. It only opens. So tonight, you do not have to understand. You do not have to believe fully. You do not even have to hope loudly. You only have to open just a little, and let stillness tend the rest. When the monks returned to that crack in the stone, weeks later, the flower was gone. But something remained, a softness in the space where it once stood, a memory of color, a new scent in the morning air. Growth doesn't always leave petals. Sometimes it leaves peace, and that is enough. That is how the garden keeps blooming, even after the bloom is gone. And maybe you, too, are beginning to bloom in ways that only stillness can see. So stay here. Let the silence work its hands through you. Let the wildflowers return on their own time. Let the garden grow without you trying to be the gardener. It began in silence, a hush before the first drop. Not a storm, not a warning, just a cool stillness, as if the world was holding its breath. Then a soft sound. Rain meeting bronze. One drop, then another, falling gently on the old temple bell that had not rung in years. The bell did not resist. It received. And the rain did not ask if the bell was ready. It simply fell. There was no test, no judgment, no demand to earn the blessing. The monks paused, heads tilted upward, eyes soft. This was not a rain that punished. It did not pour to cleanse guilt. It fell because falling was its way of giving, and the bell, that silent keeper of old echoes, shivered not from shame, but from memory. You've known other rains, the kind that come with thunder, with consequences, with questions. Why did this happen? Why weren't you stronger? Why do you still feel this? But not this rain. This rain asks nothing. It simply lands wherever it is welcome. And tonight it is welcome here. on the rooftop of your worry, on the garden of your grief, on the path you thought you'd have walked better by now. It comes not to wash away your story, but to remind you that your story does not disqualify you from gentleness. You've spent years trying to explain your pain, to translate your silence, to make your wounds sound logical. You've spoken in circles just to convince someone, even yourself, that your sorrow makes sense. But the rain needs no explanation. It does not ask why the bell is silent. It does not need a reason to fall on your shoulders. It touches everyone the same. The cracked bowl, the broken vow, the breathless ache, the heart that no longer trusts itself to feel. The rain does not compare. It only meets. You are being met now. Not for your progress, not for your posture, but because something in you has always deserved softness, even if you don't believe it yet, even if your chest still tightens at the thought of being loved without condition, even if there are parts of you still hiding in the corners, waiting for a question they can finally answer well. There are no questions tonight, only rain. And it falls as if it knows you've spent enough time trying to justify your sadness. Let it fall. Let it settle into your breath, your bones, the space behind your eyes. Let it soak the mask you've been wearing, the one that says, "I'm fine," even when everything inside you is calling for silence and soft ground. This is your soft ground. You don't have to explain why you hurt. You don't have to explain why it still lingers. You only have to be still enough to let the rain find you. The bell does not ring on its own. It waits for touch. And tonight, that touch is gentle. No striking, no urgency. Just drop after drop after drop, reminding it that it still responds to care. So do you. You may have forgotten beneath the noise, but something in you still echoes when touched without demand. Let that echo return now. Not loud, not proud, just enough to feel what you are still capable of receiving. Love without requirement, peace without perfection, rain without question. It's strange how unfamiliar gentleness can feel when you've lived too long without it. Strange how hard it is to trust something soft when you've grown used to being pierced by every voice, including your own. You've been taught that kindness must be earned, that softness comes after answers, that peace waits until you deserve it. But the rain has no such rules. It falls on rooftops of the innocent and the ashamed, on gardens tended with care and those left wild with weeds. It falls on you now, not because you passed some secret test, but because you are here, still breathing, still breaking open in places you tried so long to keep sealed. And that, the monks say, is enough. Some of the most sacred things do not arrive with ceremony. They slip in through cracks. They find you when you're tired of looking, when you're done trying to earn it, when your arms finally drop from holding yourself together for too long. That's how the rain enters, not as reward, but as recognition. It sees what you won't say aloud, that you're tired of punishing yourself for being human, that you've mistaken your sensitivity as a flaw, that you've tried to trade your softness for something sharper because the world made softness feel unsafe. But look again. The rain is the gentlest thing you know, and it softens even stone. Let it soften you now. You do not need to rehearse your pain. You do not need to explain why you still wake with the weight. The rain already knows. It knows because it has fallen on every ache the world has ever tried to bury. It remembers. It reflects. It restores without interrogation. That's the kind of love you're allowed to feel tonight. Not the kind that measures. Not the kind that waits for you to be ready. Just the kind that falls again and again until you remember what it feels like to be held without being asked to perform. Let yourself be held. There is nothing to prove in this silence, no metric to meet, no healing that must be declared. Healing isn't something you announce. It's something you notice when the rain lands and you don't flinch. It's something you feel when you stop apologizing for the parts of you that still need to be loved gently. You've spent years answering questions that were never yours to hold. Why are you like this? Why do you still cry? Why haven't you moved on yet? Let the rain answer for you now. Let it say, because softness is not delay, because pain does not operate on a schedule, because letting go isn't always the bravest thing. Sometimes, staying with yourself is the greater courage. Staying in the storm, staying in the ache, staying in the part of you that still aches for softness you don't know how to ask for. You don't need to ask for it tonight. The rain already chose you. It chose the roof above your regrets. It chose the path you almost abandoned. It chose the breath you took between breakdowns. And now it chooses your skin. Let it land there, on your shoulders, your chest, your eyes that have seen too much and still hoped. You don't have to pretend you're okay. Not here, not with this rain. Let it know you. Let it bless you without needing to understand you. Even the monks don't pretend to know why certain sorrows take longer to leave. They just light the candle, boil the tea, and leave the door open in case gentleness wants to come in. So leave your door open tonight. Let the rain come through. Let it enter without needing to clean you. Let it love you without trying to fix you. You are not broken. You are weathered. And weathered things hold wisdom. The bell knows this. It once rang for ceremony, for loss, for prayer. And now it sits quiet, catching rain and rusting in beautiful ways. It no longer asks to be rung. It only asks to be touched without being tested. So do you. There's a story the monks tell of a traveler who arrived with a heart full of shame. He knelt in the courtyard, told the elder every mistake, every weakness, every moment he had not been enough. The elder listened, then said nothing, only gestured toward the roof where the rain was falling gently on the bell. The traveler looked up and cried for the first time in years, not because he was forgiven, but because he realized he had never needed to be judged in the first place. Sometimes, being seen without question is more healing than being forgiven. That's what the rain offers, a seeing that does not demand a story, a presence that stays, even if you fall silent. And if, tonight, you have no words left good, let the rain speak for you. Let it tap out your longing against the windows of the heart. Let it carry away the tired explanations you've been giving to people who were never ready to listen anyway. Let it bless you in all the places you still carry apology. There is nothing to apologize for. Not tonight. Let yourself be loved without needing to be understood. Let yourself be washed without having to explain the dirt. Let yourself be chosen even in your silence. The rain does not ask why the flower opens. It only falls until the flower is ready to bloom. So too, you. No pressure, no deadline, no questions, only falling, only softening, only being met in the most human part of you, the part that still aches to be seen without being measured. And if you sleep tonight, let it be not because the pain is gone. Let it be because something deeper has arrived. A trust that no longer argues with the rain, a knowing that doesn't need to explain your story to feel worthy of its peace. You are not here to answer questions tonight. You are here to be touched by something that doesn't need your permission to be kind. You are here to remember what it feels like to be chosen without needing to qualify. And if, by morning, you wake with nothing but silence, let it echo the only truth that matters. You were loved last night, not for your strength, but for your softness. And no one asked you why. It lived near the back wall of the temple, small, quiet, set in a clay dish shaped by hand, not symmetry. You wouldn't have noticed it, not unless you were looking. It didn't shine for ceremony. It wasn't placed on the altar. It didn't draw attention like the tall golden candles lit during prayers for the world. but it burned, soft and steady. A thread of flame no taller than a fingertip, always there, even when the wind came, especially then. The wind had a way of finding the temple. It slipped through the wooden cracks like it knew where to go between the floorboards, beneath the eaves, through the shoji screens that bent but never broke. When it came, the big candles swayed. Some extinguished themselves in protest, some hissed and curled into smoke. But the small one in the clay dish, it flickered. Yes, it bowed, it trembled, it danced wildly for a breath, but it did not go out. No one protected it. No one cupped their hands around it. No one whispered encouragement. They let it stand, and somehow it did. You've had days like that, nights like that, moments when something came through: grief, loss, an unexpected silence, a door closing too hard inside you, and you felt yourself shake, not fall apart, not shatter, but something shifted, something leaned. You thought, this is it. This is the gust that takes me. But it didn't. And maybe you never gave yourself credit for surviving that moment. Maybe you told yourself you should have been stronger, shouldn't have shaken, should have been over it by now. But strength doesn't mean stillness. It doesn't mean you never tremble. It means you stay lit, even when the wind comes through. And it always comes through. The monks never blamed the wind. They never cursed it for entering. They simply observed: wind enters, candles respond. It's what happens. It's not wrong. It's not failure. It's life. And like the candle, you've responded to life. You've flickered. You've danced. You've leaned into darkness and still kept your glow. That matters. Maybe no one saw. Maybe no one knew you were that close to disappearing. But you know, and the candle knows. It knows the sacredness of trembling but not quitting, of shaking but not breaking, of being small but stubborn. The monks call it the quiet fire. They say it lives in people who have stopped trying to prove they're strong and started learning how to stay. It's not about being fearless. It's not about shining for others. It's about staying lit for yourself, for the parts of you that still need warmth, for the nights when no one comes. Even now, your light is real, even if it feels small, even if you've been told you're too soft to survive. Let them believe that. Let them miss the miracle of a soul that never stops glowing just because the world grows cold. Let yourself flicker. Let yourself feel. Let the wind come. You're not here to resist the wind. You're here to remember you can stay lit through it. That's what makes you sacred. Not your size, not your stillness, not your perfection, your persistence, your refusal to go out. There was a time you thought you had to be unshakable to be worthy. That being centered meant never moving, never doubting, never collapsing for a moment under the weight. You thought peace meant silence inside your chest. That strength meant being the last one, standing shoulders square, voice steady, eyes dry. But then life came, with its wind, and its silence, and its relentless, holy undoing. And suddenly, you weren't the statue anymore. You were the flame, flickering, trembling. Still here, you are allowed to shake. You are allowed to change shape in the wind's presence. You are allowed to bend without apology, because bending is not breaking. And sometimes, the wind is not your enemy. Sometimes it's what reveals the resilience of your fire. The monks speak of the night. A storm found the mountain. No one slept. Tiles lifted. Lanterns fell. But in the back of the hall, that same candle, the one in the clay dish, swayed like a reed and kept glowing until morning. No one touched it. No one tended it. It stayed because it had learned that the wind comes and goes, but the flame can remain, not by fighting, not by hiding, but by yielding just enough to stay alive. This is your story too. You don't have to resist everything. You don't have to tense your body every time life changes direction. You don't have to hold your breath just to keep your spirit from being blown out. You only have to keep burning through the movement. Trust the flame to find its balance again. There is wisdom in the way you shake, a rhythm in your tremble, a grace in your glow. You are not fragile. You are simply responsive. You feel the wind. And that is not weakness. That is awareness. That is presence. That is life moving through you, without taking you. The monks say, "A flame that resists the wind burns out in pride. A flame that dances with the wind lasts the longest." So dance if you must. Let your emotions rise. Let your thoughts ripple. Let your breath change shape, but stay lit. That is all. You are not required to be still. You are only asked to stay. And even staying doesn't mean always strong. Sometimes staying looks like lying down in tears, but keeping the part of you that hopes alive, even faintly, even as a flicker. That flicker matters more than you know. That flicker is what brought you here. It's what called the silence back to you. It's what told the wind you were not ready to be taken. It's what reminds the darkness you still exist. And not just exist, but glow. Softly, stubbornly, unapologetically. You have every right to remain lit, even if your flame doesn't look like it used to. Even if others don't call it fire anymore. Even if your strength is quiet now, the kind you don't post about. The kind that doesn't always have words. Let it be quiet. Let it live. You are a candle the world forgot to extinguish. And maybe that is your gift. Not to roar, not to blind, not to convince anyone, but simply to continue. You are still here, and that is more than enough. There's a final story the monks share on nights when the wind feels strongest. They say a child once asked the elder, "Why does the candle dance when the wind touches it?" The elder answered, "Because it trusts the wind to come and go." And when the child said, "But what if the wind stays?" the elder smiled and lit a second candle from the first, and then a third, and then a fourth. "Then we keep passing the flame," he said, "until the wind has nothing left to chase. You are part of that passing. Every time you keep your light through grief, through fear, through the breathless pause before surrender, you pass the flame on, to the version of you who wakes tomorrow, to the soul beside you, listening in silence, to the world which is always darker than it admits. You are a quiet miracle, still lit, still warm, even with everything that's tried to shake you, even with the wind still at your door. So rest now, not because the storm is over, but because you remembered you don't have to put it out to survive it. You only have to remain a little bit alive, a little bit glowing, like the candle that never asked to be the brightest, only the last one burning. And now you know you are. You thought it was locked. That's what kept you circling, years maybe, or lifetimes. Wearing a path in the grass before an old gate you believed would not open, you pressed your ear to the wood, you stared through the cracks. You dreamed of what lay beyond it, the silence, the stillness, the kind of peace you'd heard about but never truly touched. And every time you reached for the handle, you told yourself not yet, not ready, not allowed, not worthy. The gate was never locked. It was never even closed. But belief is a powerful builder. It can build prisons without stone. It can create barriers without hinges. And so you stayed, not by force, by habit, by fear, by the ache that says peace must be earned through suffering. But it doesn't. It never did. The monks tell of a wanderer who walked for many seasons in search of the monastery. She followed the stories, the footprints, the fading map. She climbed mountains, crossed dry rivers, let go of what she once carried. She arrived thin, dust-covered, quiet with exhaustion, and there it was, the gate, moonlit, old, beautiful. She fell to her knees, wept, not from joy but from fear that it might be closed. She leaned her forehead against the ancient wood and whispered, "I have come." No reply, only wind. But then, without effort, without creak, the gate drifted inward, not as if it had been forced open, but as if it had never been closed. Inside, the elder waited. Tea already warm, a cushion already placed. He said nothing, just smiled, as if to say, "You could have come sooner. But I understand why you didn't. You were never waiting for the gate to open. You were waiting to believe you were allowed to walk through. Maybe you've been waiting too. Not for a path, not for a sign, but for permission. To rest, to exhale, to stop climbing. To stop solving your pain like it's a riddle with a prize on the other side. But the prize has always been here. It is not beyond the gate. It is the gate, and the gate was never locked. Look again. Not with your eyes, with your breath. Can you feel it? The quiet invitation you mistook for silence? The welcome you missed because you expected it to be louder? It's here, and you're here too. That is enough. You don't need to prepare yourself for peace. You don't need to become the version of you you imagine would be more worthy of it. Peace has never asked for preparation. It does not knock. It waits. It waits behind every breath. It waits beneath the grief. It waits at the edge of every breakdown you thought would end you, but only brought you closer to surrender. There is a gate in the center of your chest, and it's open. It's always been open. But when pain came, you closed your eyes and convinced yourself the way back was gone. It's not gone. It's just quiet. Like moonlight on stone. Like a path remembered in a dream you almost forgot. The mind is good at building gates, but it's not very good at seeing when they've disappeared. It remembers what was once shut and assumes it still is. It remembers being turned away and writes the story again, even when the ending has changed. You've done this. You've approached stillness with hesitation because once it did not answer you fast enough. You mistook the silence as rejection. You took the waiting as a closed door. But some gates do not swing wide. They open the moment you stop trying to prove you deserve to pass through. You don't need to explain why you left yourself behind. You don't need to justify why it's taken so long to come home. You're here now. And the gate never kept you out. It only reflected the fear that lived in your own hands. Hands that thought you needed to fix your breath before you were allowed to rest. Hands that thought you had to carry every version of your past on your back, like a penance. But even the wind is not asked to account for where it has been. It is simply welcome when it arrives. So are you. Peace does not ask you to be different. It only asks you to notice that you are already near, that it lives not in arrival, but in recognition. There is no test here. There is no evaluation of your worth. There is only the soft swing of the gate, the cool night air, and the sound of your own heart finally walking through. Have you ever seen the way moonlight touches a gate? It does not ask where it's been. It does not avoid the rusted parts. It does not wait for it to be polished. It simply lands. It says, "This too can be illuminated." That is the kind of grace you are allowed to receive now. No longer chasing, no longer doubting, no longer asking permission. The monks say, the gate opens when you stop asking it to. Because peace is not an answer. It is the end of needing one. And love? Love is the echo that stays behind when you realize you were never unwelcome. You don't need to hold your breath here. You don't need to brace. The wind has already passed. The gate stands open, and you are already inside. Look around. It may feel unfamiliar at first. The absence of struggle, the silence that does not accuse, the ground that doesn't require your suffering as proof of arrival. But this is not unfamiliar. It's just been too long. This is the home you forgot was always within reach, and now you remember. There is a monk who stands near the gate every morning at dawn. He does not close it. He does not guard it. He sweeps. Leaves, dust, small memories carried in on the breeze. He says, "The gate stays open, but the path must be cared for. You are that path now. Let your next breath be the broom. Let it clear the stones. Let it remind your feet that they are already welcome to walk without proving anything. You've spent enough time trying to earn your entry. Now you may rest. Not because the journey is over, but because you finally see you were never outside. You were never late. You were only circling what you already belonged to. And if you stand here now quiet, soft, trembling with the echo of all that nearly kept you away, that too is welcome. The gate never asked you to be strong. It only asked that you notice it had never been locked. Let that noticing be enough. Let this moment be the one you stop seeking. Let it be the return without ceremony, the belonging without effort. Let it be moonlight on an open gate with no one standing in your way. Let it be peace arriving not like thunder but like your own breath coming back to you. And if you sleep tonight, may it be as someone who no longer waits at the threshold, but someone who finally walks in. Someone who lays down their story beside the gate and chooses, at last, to rest on the other side of seeking. You thought it was tight. You were so sure. You felt the tension at the wrist, in the chest, through the breath that never seemed to reach all the way in. You believed you were bound, stuck, tethered to something ancient, invisible, and inescapable. You didn't pull too hard. You didn't run. Because somewhere inside, you had decided that freedom was for those who never got tied up to begin with. So you stayed still, held your breath, watched the world go on, while you learned how to live small within the circle of your imagined restraint. The monks tell of a student who sat in stillness for many years, never stepping beyond the third stone outside the temple gate. When asked why, she answered, "There is a rope. It keeps me from moving further. It's not visible, but I feel it." The elder brought her a bowl of water, placed it in her lap, and asked her to close her eyes. She did. Then he took her hands quietly, gently, and placed in them a piece of rope. It was old, frayed, softened by time. "Open," he said. She did. And there it was, the rope she had feared. Except now, it was lying across her palms, loose, untied, resting like a forgotten memory with no power of its own. Tears came, not from pain, from the realization that the thing she thought was holding her had never even been tied. She had bound herself with belief. You have too, haven't you? Not out of weakness, but out of love for safety. Out of the tender, trembling instinct to not risk more pain, to not walk into unknown territory without some imagined permission to be free. You feared what was beyond the third stone, so you taught yourself to stay within the second, to live where the rope could still be felt. But now, you're beginning to see. The rope? It never moved. It never pulled. It just was a memory, a story, a shape you gave to fear so you could understand it. That's the thing about fear. It rarely comes in chains. It comes in language. It comes in thoughts like, "This is who I am. I can't change. This always happens to me. I'm not ready. I shouldn't want more." And slowly, these thoughts wrap themselves around you like twine. Nothing sharp, nothing sudden, just slow pressure until you mistake it for truth. And the saddest part? You learned to defend the rope. You told yourself you needed it, that it kept you from danger, that it kept you from making mistakes. But the rope wasn't holding you. It never was. You were just afraid of what it would mean to walk forward without an excuse for why you stayed behind. The monks say, "The tightest knots are made from stories we forgot to question." So now, in this stillness, begin to question. Not harshly, not to shame yourself, but to see clearly. Ask, what part of me is still crouched before an invisible gate? What belief have I carried like a chain when it was only ever a suggestion? You don't have to undo the whole rope tonight. Just notice it. Notice how it lays across your hands, not wrapped, not locked, just there, waiting for you to realize you're free. There's a moment just before you release the rope where your hands hesitate, not because it's tight, but because it's familiar. Familiar pain has a way of feeling safer than unfamiliar freedom. You know how to sit still. You've made a life within invisible boundaries. You've memorized how to stay close to what won't hurt you, even if it also won't heal you. But staying safe has begun to cost you something. Not your life, not your worth, but your motion, your openness, your truth. The rope may have never been tied, but you've curled around it for so long it feels like part of your skin. And now, you begin to wonder what's beyond the circle you drew around yourself. There is no violence in letting go, no force, no ripping, only this, one breath, one soft breath that does not ask if you're ready, but trusts that you are. And in that breath, your fingers loosen. The rope falls not with ceremony, not with drama, just gravity. And there you are, not bound, never bound, just waiting for the moment you could see it. There is no shame in having waited. The monks do not mock the student who stayed still for too long. They honor her return. They bow to her breath as if it were a bell. You can still bow to yourself, not because you broke free, but because you noticed you were never truly trapped. That noticing is everything. It changes the shape of your body. It changes the path of your life. You no longer wake to constraint. You wake to choice. The freedom was always there. But freedom isn't loud. It doesn't knock. It waits. It whispers. It breathes through the cracks you almost forgot to check. And now you've heard it. What comes next? That's not the question. You don't need a plan. You don't need to run. The illusion was never in your legs, it was in your thoughts. You are not tied. And because you are not tied, you do not have to hurry. You do not have to leap into the future to prove your freedom. You can walk, softly, slowly, each step a remembering, each moment a return. The monks speak of a rope found in the old forest shrine, coiled neatly in the center of the room. It hadn't been moved in decades. But people still bowed when they saw it. Not because they feared it, but because they once had feared it and now they didn't. That is the sacredness of realization, not in escaping, but in seeing clearly what you once saw through the lens of fear, and blessing it. Even the rope, even the past that made it necessary, even the stories that taught you to stay small. You do not have to hate the version of you who believed she was bound. You only have to thank her for surviving long enough to learn how to see. You've introduced yourself by your wounds, your job, your age, your country, your trauma, your talents, your regrets. But you are none of these. You are not the daughter. You are not the survivor. You are not the lover, the failure, the quiet one, the strong one, the one who never lets go. You are not the one who was abandoned or the one who always stays. You are what remains when none of that is spoken. You are what breathes when the roles fall quiet. The monk didn't speak of this because some truths dissolve in explanation, but he lived it. You could see it in the way he walked through the garden, not with purpose, but with presence. As if he was not passing through the garden, he was the garden, noticing itself bloom. When asked for guidance, he did not speak in lessons. He poured tea and asked, "Who are you when you are not trying to be?" And then he would sit, and the silence would answer. That's the gift of presence. It asks nothing of you, not even your name. It holds you not as the one who must fix or rise, but simply as the one who is here, still breathing, still being, still enough. Can you feel it now? The loosening? The way your shoulders soften when you let go of explaining yourself to your own mind? The way your heart begins to sound less like a story and more like a bell? You don't have to be anyone tonight. Not the healed one, not the hurting one, not the teacher or the student. You don't have to be the one who's getting better. You don't have to be the one who's almost there. You can just be. No role, no task, no name. Only the feeling of your own breath, moving through the space where identity once lived. Even the monk's robes began to slip. Not by accident, not in disobedience, but like leaves falling from a tree that no longer needs them. One evening, they found his robes folded beside the river, still warm from his body, still shaped by his life. But he was not in them. He was sitting in the water, eyes closed, palms open, head lifted gently toward the fading sun. When they called to him by the name he once knew, he did not turn, because there was no one to call back, only the river, only the breath, only what he had always been beneath the name. And maybe that's what you've been searching for, not more of yourself, but less, not a new label, but the space beyond labels, not to be someone better, but to be no one for just a little while. To stop trying, to stop claiming, to stop narrating and simply exist without defense. Like water, like wind, like breath on a cool morning before you remember who you're supposed to be. This is not erasure, it's return. You are not becoming nothing. You are remembering that the something you thought you had to defend was never the whole of you. There is a stillness beneath your name. There is a life behind the roles, and it's always been here, waiting, watching, whispering not through words but through presence, through peace, through the quiet recognition that you are already whole when you stop pretending to be more. The monk who forgot his name did not disappear. He became real, and in that reality, he no longer needed to be called. He simply was. And now, so are you. It wasn't the wind that pulled the leaf from the branch. It was something quieter, something unseen, something that whispered long before the others were ready. And so it fell, not with a cry, but with a silence that only the trees understood. The other leaves watched, still holding tightly, still green at the edges, still convinced that to stay was to be strong. But this one loosened, not because it was weak, not because it had given up, because it knew its time had come. It didn't ask for permission. It didn't wait for the rest to agree. It simply listened to the deep place inside where seasons turn without sound. You felt this too. That moment when the thing you've been holding, a person, a dream, a version of yourself, starts to slip, and everything inside you wants to grip tighter, because letting go first feels like failure. It feels like betrayal, like abandonment, like the ache of leaving before the story is ready to end. But what if that ache is not the sign of something wrong, but something wise? The monks tell of a student who left the temple before the final bell. She bowed to her teacher, folded her robes, packed no belongings. When asked why, she said, "I am not leaving you. I am answering something you cannot hear yet." Years later, her teacher would say, "She did not abandon the path. She walked it faster." Letting go is not always an escape. Sometimes it's an arrival. But it hurts, doesn't it, to be the one who loosens first, who sees the end before the others do, who walks away while the world still expects you to hold on. You've been that leaf. You've released what still looked beautiful to others. You've let go of what was no longer alive, even when others told you you were too early. And you grieved. Not just what you lost, but the way you had to go alone. The way no one else seemed to understand why you couldn't stay one moment longer. But listen closely. The first to let go is not the weakest. The first to let go is the first to feel the truth. And truth doesn't always wait for consensus. Sometimes it arrives like autumn, soft, cool, whispering through your chest before your mind can find the words. Letting go is not a rejection of love. It is an act of trust in the season that is calling you forward. Even grief can be a form of grace. Some grief isn't loud. It doesn't arrive with thunder. It doesn't knock down the doors. It doesn't scream across your chest. It sits quietly on the edge of your breath, like a goodbye you never got to say out loud. The grief of letting go first is like that. You carry it in silence, not because no one cares, but because no one understands why it hurt you to walk away from something that hadn't ended yet. They look at you and say, "But it was still good. But you were still smiling. But nothing was broken." But they didn't feel the roots drying. They didn't see the soil shift beneath the surface. They didn't hear what you heard, the beginning of stillness where once there was life. Sometimes what dies first is the sound, the conversation no longer flowing, the laughter delayed, the breath between two people not arriving at the same rhythm. You felt it before anyone else did. And still, you stayed longer than you needed to. You tried. You waited. You hoped the wind would turn and give you one more season of warmth. But deep down, something had already begun to fall, and it took everything in you to let go before the branch snapped on its own. You didn't let go to escape. You let go so you wouldn't have to lie to your own soul. And yet, even now, the grief lingers, because there is sorrow in being the one who saw clearly first. There is sorrow in leaving with love still in your hands. But what's also true is this: the leaf that falls first touches the earth, while the others still cling in fear, and the earth welcomes it gently. No rush, no noise, only the soft landing of something brave enough to surrender. You've done that. You surrendered when staying would have cost you something deeper. Not your pride, not your time, but your truth. The monks speak of a tree that stands just beyond the meditation hall. Each year, a single leaf lets go weeks before the others. They call it the wise leaf. They never sweep it too quickly. They let it rest where it falls. Because they say, some departures are sacred long before they are understood. And you are not waiting for someone to understand anymore. You are simply honoring what you had to do. Letting go doesn't mean you didn't love. It means you loved deeply enough to leave without blame. You did not curse the branch. You did not resent the wind. You only listened to what was changing before it broke you. That's the kind of grief you don't have to hide anymore. You can speak it now, to the river, to the moon, to your breath. You can say, I didn't leave because I stopped caring. I left because the caring was no longer met. And I didn't want to become someone who clung just to feel safe. There is nothing selfish about saving your softness. Nothing cruel about stepping back when you are the only one still stepping forward. And if the branch aches without you, if it creaks in the wind and wonders where your warmth went, that is not your burden to carry anymore. Your work was to feel the shift and answer it. Your work was to love without lying, even if it meant letting go alone. You are not cold for being the first to release. You are not heartless for following the truth instead of the timeline others expected of you. You are simply in rhythm with what is real. Even the seasons must change alone. Spring does not wait for winter to give permission. Autumn does not apologize for arriving while the flowers still bloom. And so you, too, may move before the others are ready. Not in rebellion, not in anger, but because stillness has already entered your breath. And truth no longer lets you pretend. Let that be enough. You did not let go too early. You let go exactly when you knew you needed to. And even now, as the others continue to hold on, you are not wrong for having loosened your grasp before the end was obvious. The first to let go is not the weakest. They are simply the one who trusts the invisible, the one who honors what can no longer be seen but still speaks in the wind. Let the wind carry your sorrow now. Let it lift it gently off your chest. Let it bless the space where something once lived. You don't have to close the story with anger. You don't have to call it a mistake. You can simply call it done, and beautiful, and real, and worthy of grief without guilt. That is the wisdom of the leaf that let go first. It never returns to the branch, but it never forgets how it once clung. And that memory, soft, silent, true, makes the fall feel sacred. You let go, and you lived. That was not a tragedy. That was a turning. And now, you are free to land where you belong. The monk did not speak. He simply poured. You sat across from him, hands open, heart full, mind quietly unraveling at the edges. You thought this was about tea. So you held your cup out, grateful, respectful, still. And he poured. Steam curled through the space between you, scented with jasmine and something older, something warm that reminded you of things you tried to forget. The tea reached the rim, and still he poured. You watched it rise, pause and spill. First, just a drop over the edge, then a trickle down the side of the cup, onto your fingers, then the table, then the floor. Still he poured. You opened your mouth to speak, to tell him it was full, that it was enough. But the words caught in your chest, like everything else you've been trying to hold. And that, of course, was the point. The cup was full, but you hadn't set it down. You hadn't said, "That's enough." You hadn't moved. You just kept holding. And now, the spill was no longer his doing. It was yours. Because even when something good is given, when we grip it too tightly, for too long, without space, without pause, it becomes something else. It becomes too much. You've done this, haven't you? Held joy so tightly that it began to turn to pressure. Held grief so long that it fermented into bitterness. Held silence until it burned like noise. Held love until it started to feel like control. You were trying to preserve it, to honor it, to not waste what had been given. But what you didn't see was that holding without release turns even blessings into burdens. The monks say, when a full cup is not emptied, it becomes a flood. And floods do not nourish, they drown. You weren't meant to hold everything. Not all the time, not alone, not without letting any of it go. And yet, you kept pouring more in. Memories, emotions, responsibilities, stories, roles, regrets, achievements, gratitude, loss. Even beauty can overflow the soul if we don't pause to release it. You became a cup with no space left. And then wondered why everything inside you felt heavy, unsteady, unbalanced. It wasn't because you were weak, it was because you were saturated. The monk kept pouring because he needed you to feel it, not just see it. The warmth running down your fingers, the tremble in your wrist as the weight grew, the silent question inside you, how long must I hold this? And now you know, not forever. There comes a moment when even the wisest hands must stop holding. When the water has risen beyond the lip of the bowl, and the gentlest act left is to pour some back into the earth. But you were praised for your capacity, how much you could carry, how much you could feel, how much you could do without spilling a single drop in front of anyone. And so you became the one who held it all, the one who remembered every detail, the one who showed up even when your knees were shaking, the one who swallowed the words so others wouldn't have to taste them. You thought that was strength. That stillness meant silence. That love meant holding on, even when your hands ached from the weight. But stillness is not holding. It's allowing things to come and go without force. Silence is not swallowing. It's listening without clinging to the sound or the story. And love. Real love is not the grip, it is the open palm. The monk poured until you looked at him, eyes wide, not with panic, but understanding. You set the cup down. It made no sound, no ceremony, just the soft decision to release. He smiled, not because you had learned something new, but because you had remembered what your body always knew, that you are allowed to stop holding when the holding starts to harm. Even the sacred must be poured out if the cup is to hold anything new. You've been taught to cherish things, to protect them, to not waste. But some things, when held too long, begin to spoil. A memory, a promise, a story about who you used to be, a love that no longer breathes. You hold on, not because it still fits, but because setting it down feels like loss. But what if the setting down is the ceremony? What if the spilling is not failure, but transformation? The tea that flowed down your hands did not vanish. It seeped into the wood, joined the air, fed the ground. Nothing truly leaves. It only changes shape, and so must you. You don't need to fear what overflows. It's a signal, a message, a kindness from the soul saying, "This is too much now. You are not broken. You are full." The bowl must be emptied, not once, but again and again. Not because it is flawed, but because it is alive. Even monks forget this. Even you will forget again. That's okay. The remembering always returns with the breath. Inhale truth. Exhale effort. Inhale presence. Exhale pressure. Inhale what is real. Exhale what is heavy. There is no shame in saying, enough. Not all wisdom is adding. Some of it is surrender. You may pour it out now. The guilt, the grief, the goodness that's turned to tension, the beauty that has nowhere else to go. Let it spill. Let it bless the table. Let it soften the edges of what once needed to be held. You are not wasteful for releasing. You are wise. The monk never refilled your cup that day. He left it empty, and somehow it felt more sacred that way. As if the emptiness itself was holy, as if space was what made the tea taste like peace. And now may you carry that peace in your open hands, not as something to grip, but as something to let breathe, not as something to preserve, but as something to share until it empties. And then, again, because you are not a vessel for permanence, you are a rhythm. You fill, you spill, you rest, you return, over and over. And none of it means you failed. Only that you lived, only that you listened, only that you too have learned when to pour. The sky didn't speak that night. It didn't need to. Its silence was enough to call you toward the river, and so you walked. Not because you had a plan, but because something inside you had grown too tired to argue with stillness. By the time you arrived, the moon had already opened its palms over the water, scattering silver across the surface like it was blessing something that hadn't yet begun. And there, just at the edge of the worn wooden dock, was the boat. It didn't call out. It didn't shine. It simply waited, as if it knew you would come. There was no paddle, no oar, no sail, only an old rope loosely knotted to the dock post, and a hollow seat shaped by quiet journeys. You stepped in, not out of courage, not out of certainty, but out of the soft exhaustion that comes when control finally lets go of your throat. You didn't untie the rope, you just touched it. And somehow, that was enough. The boat pulled itself free, not fast, not dramatic, just released. And in that moment, as the dock faded from under your feet and the current began its slow ceremony, you realized something sacred. You were moving, and you weren't making it happen. You were being carried, no hands pushing, no map whispering which bend to follow, no anxious rhythm reminding you of time, only the wide sky above, the river beneath, and you finally still. How many years have you spent paddling upstream, trying to fix, trying to find, trying to force life to make more sense than it was ever meant to? You fought the current, believing you were stronger for doing so. And yes, you were strong, but you were also tired. Tired of steering your way through every ache. Tired of commanding the tides like they were yours to control. But this river, this soft-moving night water, asks nothing of you but presence. It does not need your effort to know where it's going. It does not require your hands to remember its path, and perhaps you don't need to guide everything to be safe. Perhaps being held is also a kind of strength. The boat rocked gently as moonlight painted quiet patterns on the water. You let your breath match the rhythm, longer, slower, looser. There were no instructions, no destination, and still you did not feel lost. You had entered the peace of surrender. The monks say, the current remembers what your mind forgets. You remembered then how many times you'd clenched your way through life, trying to hold love together, trying to heal faster, trying to earn rest by proving your worth. You were always rowing, even when no one asked you to. But now here, in the hush of river light, you began to see the wisdom of the boat without a paddle. It does not try to arrive. It allows, and in allowing, it gets where it needs to go. This was never about giving up. This was about giving in, not to chaos, not to confusion, but to trust. The kind of trust that doesn't need guarantees. The kind of trust that whispers, I may not know where I'm going, but I trust that I'm being taken. You placed your hand in the water. It was cold, alive, unpredictable, and kind. It didn't pull, it didn't warn, it only moved. And now, so did you. You are not lost, you are not stuck, you are not behind. You are being carried. Let that be enough for now. You always thought letting go meant losing your way, that to drift was to disappear, that surrender was for the broken, that trust was a beautiful idea meant for someone else's story, but the river never doubted you, even when you resisted, even when you feared its depth, even when you clung to the illusion that your hands were the reason you moved forward. It waited for the moment you would stop turning storms into maps, stop shouting questions into the dark, stop mistaking struggle for progress. It waited because the river knows. The ones who surrender late are often the ones who carry the deepest courage. And now that you've let go not of hope, but of control, it begins to speak, not in words, not in thunder, but in rhythm, the soft pulse of water against wood, the steady hum of movement without effort, the quiet, knowing that the current needs nothing from you but permission. You give it, and for the first time in a long while, you feel what it's like to be held without being fixed. No one is trying to heal you here. No one is trying to label your wounds. No one is asking you to explain why your chest has felt like a closed door for so many months. The river does not diagnose. It does not demand. It simply receives. Every part of you, even the parts you've tried to hide, even the ones you didn't know were aching. You close your eyes, and suddenly, the movement isn't just around you. It's within you. You feel yourself softening where once you were armored. You feel the grip in your shoulders start to melt. You feel the thoughts that once circled begin to lie down like leaves after the wind has passed. This is what trust becomes when there's no story left to perform. It becomes rest, not the kind of rest that waits until you've earned it, but the kind that says, your being is enough. Even now, as your boat drifts into deeper dark, you are not afraid, because the fear came from the belief that you were alone. And you're not. You never were. The current has always been here beneath the chaos, beneath the striving, beneath the names and titles and plans. It waited until you were quiet enough to feel it. Now you float past trees that lean to listen, past rocks that do not move but still witness, past stars that blink without needing to be seen. You are not forgotten. You are simply unclaimed for a while. Unclaimed by urgency. Unclaimed by identity. Unclaimed by the weight of needing to know what's next. And that unclaiming is not absence, it's freedom. This boat, this moon, this pathless drift, it's teaching you that not knowing can be holy. You do not always need to answer. You do not always need to lead. Sometimes Your deepest wisdom is in how you allow yourself to be led, even if that leading feels like stillness, even if the only direction is the one that feels like breath returning. You remember something now, not from a book, not from a sermon, from somewhere deeper, a story the monks tell. There once was a master who gave his student a boat with no paddle and no map. When the student asked, "How will I find the shore?" the master only smiled and said, "Find the place where the water becomes you," and then walked away. That's what you're doing now, finding the place where you stop resisting and start becoming. You don't need to know how far you've come. You don't need to know what awaits at the edge. Your only task is to remain present to the drift, to let the motion be enough, to let the not knowing be sacred. You place your hand to your chest. It feels like it's no longer caged. It feels like it belongs to the rhythm again, the rhythm of being instead of doing, the rhythm of trust instead of control. You are not steering. You are not drowning. You are being carried. And this, right here, is not a detour. It is the path. Let it hold you. Let it take you to the places you stopped believing existed. Let it bring you home in a way no map ever could. The boat does not speak. The river does not ask. The moon does not judge. But all three, in their stillness, know you have finally remembered. There is wisdom in drifting. There is love in being unheld by effort, but held by everything else. And there is peace, true peace in the boat with no paddle. There are moments when silence does not mean nothing is happening. Moments when the still air is not empty but listening. You stood in the garden behind the temple, just before dawn. The air was cool, but not cold. Alive, but not loud. The wind moved in a way that didn't disturb it, whispered, almost like it didn't want to interrupt your breath. You came here because something inside you was aching for an answer. Not a loud one, not a miracle, just something to shift. You'd tried asking, tried writing it out, tried crying it through, tried holding the question so close it nearly became a part of your skin. But still, no reply, no flash of certainty, no thunder from the sky, no voice in the cave of your chest saying, "Go this way," just more quiet. And yet this morning the quiet felt different, not hollow, not cruel, soft. Something about the stillness felt full. You walked past the empty lanterns, past the prayer flags faded by wind, past the sandals neatly lined along the edge of the wooden steps. And there it was, the old bronze bell that hung beneath the cedar beams, its rim worn smooth from centuries of hands, its body greened by time, a bell that had called thousands into stillness, but today no one had touched it. And yet it sang, not loud, not sharp, but clear, a hum, a breath, a tone so subtle you weren't sure if it was in your ears or your bones. No one had struck it, no monk had pulled the cord, no ceremony had begun. It simply began to ring. The breeze moved through the temple frame like it knew the bell's secret, like it had waited for the right moment to pass through the hollow metal and awaken a sound that didn't need an audience. And the bell responded, not with volume, but with presence. It didn't try to announce itself. It didn't perform. It just vibrated softly, purely, as if the wind had reminded it what it was made for. And you felt that sound more than you heard it. You felt it in your chest, in the part of you that had been quiet for too long, in the part that no longer trusted loudness because loudness so often lied. This sound, this subtle, trembling note, was truth. It had no need to convince you. It simply existed. The monks say, real wisdom rings without needing to strike. And now you understood. You'd been waiting for wisdom to crash into you, to shake you out of confusion, to pour itself into your life with clarity and command. But the deepest truths don't arrive like that. They arrive like the bell, soft, sudden, unforced, You don't summon them, you receive them, only when your noise has settled, only when the wind has space to move through you without resistance. You sat down near the base of the bell, cross-legged in the dirt, and let the hum continue. It didn't rise or fall. It didn't build toward anything. It just stayed steady as breath. And something inside you matched it. Your pulse slowed. Your shoulders dropped. Your question, the one you'd been holding so tightly, didn't disappear. But it loosened. It stopped screaming. And that, too, was wisdom. Because some truths don't come to answer you. They come to quiet the question. You are not empty. You are not lost. You are simply too filled with noise to notice what is already ringing within you. The bell didn't wait to be struck. It didn't need permission. It let the wind remind it. And now, so can you. The sound continued. Not louder, not fainter, just steady. The bell did not try to prolong itself. It did not fear being forgotten. It simply allowed itself to be heard for as long as it needed, and no more. That's what peace is, not a goal, not a climax, but a sound that does not need to compete with silence. You listened, but more than that, you softened. The old habit wanted to return, the part of you that says, "What does this mean? What must I do now? Is this the sign?" But the bell answered before the question even formed. It answered with presence. Not logic, not advice, presence. It was not teaching, it was being, and that was enough. That was the awakening, because the bell was you, and the wind was life, and the sound was the moment you allowed what already lived inside you to echo outward without needing to be touched. You've struck yourself so many times trying to feel real, trying to shake something awake inside you through effort, through pain, through proving, but some bells, some souls, only ring when they are left alone, when the hand doesn't reach for them, when the mind stops trying to demand sound, when the wind, at last, is trusted. The hum of the bell didn't last forever. Eventually, the air stilled. The trees returned to their watching. The sound faded back into the bronze. But what remained was the space it had opened in you. You didn't need the sound to continue to remember it. You didn't need a monk to explain what it meant. You felt it. In the way your chest now breathed deeper, in the way your shoulders no longer held the sky, in the way your question no longer felt like a weight, but like a feather gently falling. You got up slowly, bowing your head toward the bell, not as an object but as a mirror. It had shown you something without force, without instruction, without touching you at all. And now you were ready to walk again, not because you had the answers, but because you no longer feared not having them. You no longer needed everything to shout in order to feel certain. You no longer needed the universe to shake you into awareness. You trusted that the most sacred truths are often the ones that arrive unannounced, like the bell, like the wind, like the moment you finally gave yourself permission to stop needing noise to feel awake. You walked back through the temple garden, past the stones warmed by morning light, past the robes folded in still devotion, past the incense that burned without needing a prayer. Everything around you seemed unchanged, but something in you was different. You were listening in a new way. You no longer sought the thunder. You listened for the subtle shift, the breeze, the tone beneath the moment. That is where truth lives, not always in the striking, but in the ringing that waits quietly to be heard. And tonight, when you rest your head, you may not feel the hum in your ears, but you will feel it in your life. You will notice the moments when a breath feels like an answer, when a pause feels like a yes, when a whisper of wind feels more healing than 1,000 explanations, and that is the bell within you singing again, not because it was struck, but because you finally became still enough to let life move through you. And when that happens, You don't need to make a sound. You are the sound. You don't need to be touched. You are already ringing, softly, purely, exactly when you're meant to. There is a kind of fire that does not roar, a kind of flame that does not climb or consume but stays low, quiet, glowing with a warmth that asks for nothing but presence. You found it one evening in the middle of winter, not in a hearth, not in a torch, but beneath a patch of snow in the monastery garden. At first, you thought it was a trick of the light, a strange orange reflection beneath the white. But when you knelt and touched the snow, you felt it a soft heat rising through your palm, gentle, steady, unafraid. The monk beside you did not speak. He only watched as you brushed aside the snow and revealed what lay beneath. Coals, old, smouldering, from a fire long since put out, or so it seemed. They did not burn your skin. They did not threaten. They glowed. That was all. Like something sacred that had no need to be loud in order to be real. You do not need to fear all fire, the monk finally said, his voice as calm as the falling flakes. Some fires are meant to warm, not destroy. You didn't answer. You didn't need to. The fire spoke in a different language, the language of quiet passion. And maybe, you realized, so did you. Because for most of your life, you'd known fire only in its extremes. The kind that burned bridges. The kind that hollowed out your chest after too much love. The kind that made anger feel like survival. Heat had always meant danger. Desire had always meant loss. Intensity had always meant you were about to be consumed. But this fire, this one didn't want to consume you. It wanted to stay, to glow, quietly at the edge of your being. To remind you that passion does not always shout, that longing does not always lead to ache, that love, true love, can warm you without setting your whole world on fire. The snow did not melt in panic. It softened slowly, gently. It made room for the heat instead of resisting it. And you started to wonder how many times you've run from your own warmth because you feared it would burn. How many times you've silenced your voice because its truth felt too sharp. How many times you've swallowed your desire because you believed wanting would lead to ruin. But what if your fire was never the danger? What if it was the freezing that hurt more? What if your warmth, your longing, your vividness, your ache to feel deeply wasn't a threat, but a gift? The monk didn't interrupt your thoughts. He only reached forward, cupping the glowing coals in both hands, not as a lesson, but as a blessing. He held them without trembling. And then he said, "This is the fire that keeps a traveler alive through long winters. It does not move fast, but it stays. It does not rise wildly, but it endures." The words sank into you like heat into bone. You had always wanted to endure, but thought it meant extinguishing everything that made you feel alive. You thought steadiness meant turning cold, turning down the dial on your emotions, becoming untouchable to survive. But this fire, this story, was offering you something different. It was telling you that survival can glow, that you can feel without unraveling, that your emotions don't have to consume you to be honored. You sat with the monk in silence. The snow kept falling, the garden held its breath, and the fire, the small sacred fire, stayed. It did not demand, it did not chase, it simply remained. And in its presence, so did you, not burning, not frozen, alive. You stayed by the fire long after the monk left. The coals, though quiet, never dimmed. Even as the wind moved through the garden and night settled deeper into the earth, the glow remained, not reaching, not begging for more air, just existing. You found your own breath slowing to match it. In, soft glow. Out, warm stillness. You did not need to speak. You did not need to act. The fire did not ask you to explain yourself, and for once, neither did your mind. You've lived in a world that worships intensity, where love must prove itself in heat, where anger must explode to be valid, where passion is measured by how much you're willing to burn down. But what if all of that was just noise? What if real passion is the one that stays steady, the ember that doesn't vanish when things grow cold? You look down at your hands. How many things had you let go of because they didn't spark enough, or spark too much? How many moments did you confuse stillness for indifference? How many people had you pushed away because they weren't loud enough with their love? And how many times had you done the same to yourself? There's a strange kind of grief that comes from realizing you've misunderstood your own fire, that you've spent years either smothering it or fearing its heat. But no one had ever shown you how to hold it like this, gently, without recoil, without expectation, until now. The fire beneath the snow did not ask to be admired. It did not cry for attention, and yet its quiet warmth began to soften something inside you that even tears had never reached. Not all fire is for destruction. Not all fire is meant to teach by pain. Some fire exists to remind you that you are capable of holding heat without being harmed. You touched one of the coals, fingers hovering just above its warmth, not in fear, but in reverence. It pulsed, as if aware that someone had finally stopped judging it for being too quiet. In the temple, the bell had sung in silence. Here, the flame glowed without flame. Both were teachings. Both were awakenings. And both whispered the same truth. You don't need to be loud to be alive. You don't need to rage to be real. You don't need to blaze to be meaningful. Sometimes, your truest power is in how you continue when everything else has grown cold. That night, you did not return to your room. You stayed in the garden, wrapped in the same quiet that wrapped the fire. You thought of all the times you'd mistaken destruction for depth, of the nights you called people back just to feel the heat of pain again, of the days you chased intensity because stillness felt like being ignored. But this warmth, this moment, was teaching you that love doesn't need to burn to be real. It can arrive in gentle glows, in soft eyes, in the way someone stays, in the breath that doesn't leave when the air grows cold. And perhaps your own heart has always known this. It just needed permission to believe it was enough. You are enough, even when you're not blazing, even when your voice trembles, even when your hands are too tired to reach. You are still a fire. And not all fires need to prove their worth by how quickly they consume. The monk returned, just before dawn. He brought nothing with him but a bowl of water and a shawl. He placed the bowl beside the coals and covered the stones with the cloth, not to extinguish them, but to let them rest. They do not need to burn forever, he said softly, only long enough to remind you that warmth can live quietly. You nodded, because now you understood. You stood up, not hurried. You walked away, not empty. Inside your chest, beneath the snow of old grief, something glowed. It did not flare. It did not spark. It did not call for attention. It simply stayed. And when you touched it, not to use it, not to tame it, but to honor it, you felt what it meant to be alive without being on fire. To carry passion that doesn't destroy you. To hold love that doesn't beg to be proved. To walk with the warmth of a truth that doesn't need to scream. You walked through the temple halls, and no one saw the fire. But it was there. You didn't wear it on your sleeve. You didn't shout it in the dark. You just breathed with it, and it breathed with you. And that was enough. That was all it ever needed to be. They said your name once more, and then, never again. Not out of cruelty, not from anger, but because life moved forward, and names like footprints fade. You were walking along the edge of the sea, the kind of walk that feels less like travel and more like remembering. The tide was low, the air was thin and clear, as if the wind had swept everything away but breath. You stopped beside a patch of smooth, wet sand, and knelt. Without thinking, you wrote your name, the one you've carried so long it sometimes felt like a wound. Letter by letter, you carved it into the earth with your finger, not forcefully, just enough to see it take shape. There it was, the name others had used to praise you, to scold you, to cling to you, to leave you. You stared at it for a while, unsure what you were waiting for. And then the wind began to rise. Not a storm, not a gust, just a soft breath moving in from the sea, as if it had been watching, waiting for the right moment to arrive. The sand began to shift. Tiny grains lifted like memory, edges softened, the lines blurred. And just like that, your name, the one you thought you had to defend forever, was gone. Carried, not taken, not erased in violence, but surrendered to the truth that nothing named can stay. You didn't cry, not because you didn't feel, but because something in you finally understood. You are not this name. You are not the version of yourself they attached to it, not the titles, not the roles, not the history that clung to every syllable. You are not what they think when they say your name aloud. You are not even what you think when you hear it whispered in your own mind. The wind does not need a name to know where to go. The sea does not wait for anyone to call it holy. And you were never meant to be held captive by a label someone else gave you. You stood slowly, hands empty, heart full. The name was gone. And in its absence, you felt something you hadn't known you were missing. Freedom, not the kind you shout about, not the kind you chase, but the kind that arrives like morning fog, soft, inevitable, and quiet in its clarity. All your life, you've tried to shape yourself into something others could recognize. You've performed, perfected, pleased, defended, carried the weight of being someone who made sense to everyone else. But here, with the wind in your hair and no name on the shore, you felt the first breath of who you might be without all that effort, and it was enough. The wind does not ask permission to blow. It does not explain itself. It moves, because movement is its nature. And maybe so is yours. Not to be fixed in place, not to be known only by what you've been called, but to be who you are when no one is watching, when no one is naming, when no one is asking you to explain why you changed. You walked on. And the shore, as always, welcomed your passing. There are people who only ever loved the version of you they could pronounce. The shape of your name fit into their story, so they held it, repeated it, made it mean something even you couldn't always agree with. When they left, they didn't take the name, they left it behind, still echoing like a bell that no longer belongs to a temple. For years, you stood beside that sound thinking it was you. Until now, until this walk, this wind, this moment where something unspoken washed your story clean. You didn't lose yourself when the name disappeared. You found what had always existed beneath it. Breath, pulse, presence. There is a way the wind names things without words. A way the trees whisper your truth without ever needing to know how to say it. You are more than a syllable. You are more than the version others expect to remember. The fire you carry, the stillness you practice, the grief you survived, the love you gave away too freely, none of it needs to be stamped with a label to be real. It just is. And maybe that is enough. There is a teaching in Zen that says, "Before I was born, there was no me. Now that I am here, who am I?" It sounds like a riddle, but it's really a doorway. Not a doorway to answer, but to release. You walked further along the coast. A gull lifted above you, then vanished. The sea, endlessly repeating itself, didn't need a name for the tide to return. You remembered the letters you never sent, the things you tried to explain to people who had already stopped listening. You remembered how you twisted your voice to fit their expectations, how you hesitated to change because your name was so tied to who you used to be, But the wind had erased all that, not with violence, not with cruelty, with grace, because the name was never you. It was just the shape of a story. And when stories finish, they are meant to dissolve into silence. You paused beside a driftwood log, sitting quietly as the waves murmured to the shore. You didn't need to say anything, not to yourself, not to those who had forgotten, not even to the version of you still lingering in memory. Sometimes letting go doesn't feel like a release. It feels like remembering that you were never holding anything in the first place. Just echoes, just wind. You closed your eyes. And for the first time in a long time, there was no name echoing in your mind. Only breath, only wind, only the space that had always been waiting for you to return to it. The part of you that existed before the world called you anything at all, before the roles, before the trauma, before the compliments and the shame, before the labels you either ran toward or tried desperately to outrun. There is a stillness beneath all that, a wordless self that has never been lost, only hidden, only buried beneath names and needs and stories told by people who never stayed long enough to know your silence. You rose slowly from the log and continued walking, not to arrive anywhere, just to be carried like breath. No path marked your steps, no name declared your identity, but you were here, fully. There is nothing missing in you. Not because you've found everything, but because you've stopped needing to define yourself by anything. You no longer need to be remembered in order to be real. You no longer need to be named in order to belong. You are the moment before the wind speaks. You are the space between waves. You are the listener, not the name being called. And in that space, you are whole. Later that evening, as the sky blushed with the first hints of dusk, you passed a child drawing shapes in the sand. She looked up and smiled without question. Not, "What's your name?" Not, "Who are you?" Just presence, just acknowledgement. And then she returned to the shore and let the tide erase what she had written. No fear, no grief, only wonder at how easily everything flows when we let it. You smiled too, because you understood. You had nothing to write anymore, and nothing to erase. You had simply become what you had always been, beneath the name, breath, aware, alive, unwritten. And as the wind moved softly through your hair, you didn't chase it. You didn't hold it. You didn't ask it to stay. You simply let it carry you for as long as it wished to stay near. No grasping, no naming, no needing to be known, just wind. And the space you now trusted enough to live in. Not everyone will remember you, but you will remember the moment the wind touched your life and gave you back what no name ever could. Yourself. And that was enough. It had been there long before you arrived. A narrow bridge wrapped in moss, veiled by the morning fog that moved like breath across the land. You stood at its edge for longer than you could explain, not because you feared the crossing, but because you did not know if you were ready to arrive on the other side. Sometimes you don't need more time. You just need permission to take it. And so you stood. The forest did not press against your back. The bridge did not beckon. Nothing rushed you. Nothing whispered, "Hurry." And still, your mind wandered toward urgency, toward clocks, toward the invisible pressure that hums beneath the skin whenever silence lasts too long. But the bridge did not move. It did not age in your waiting. Its moss grew slowly, undisturbed. Its stones did not loosen beneath your gaze. Its path did not vanish because you hesitated. It simply remained, a quiet invitation, unchanged by your delay. You looked down at your feet, not frozen, just unsure, willing to move, but unsure if moving meant you were betraying something sacred you had yet to learn on this side of stillness. And still, the bridge waited. You thought about the others who had crossed before you. Some with purpose, some in grief, some barefoot, leaving parts of themselves with each step. Some running, some crawling, some never looking back. And yet here it stood, as if none of them had worn it down. There's a kind of love in that kind of patience, a kind of grace in something that does not abandon you just because you're slow. The world rarely gives you that. You're taught to earn time, to prove readiness, to qualify for rest only after effort. But this bridge, with its green silence and soft breath of fog, asked nothing of you except your presence. You could hear water beneath it, not crashing, just passing, just existing. And maybe, you thought, so could you. Exist, right here, not walking, not arriving, not transforming, just being, just breathing. The monks had once told you, when you don't know where to go, don't go. Let the stillness speak. You never understood how stillness could speak until now, here, with nothing but mist and moss and the quiet hum of something that wasn't asking you to change. Healing doesn't always come in motion. Sometimes it blooms when you pause, when you sit beside the next step and make peace with the not knowing. The bridge, as always, remained. A passage, a promise, but never a demand. And in that stillness, you began to sense something you hadn't noticed before. You were not the only one waiting. The bridge was waiting too, not for your decision, but to be walked with love, with intention, with trust, and it would wait as long as it needed. It would not rot from your delay. It would not collapse from your doubt. It had held centuries of silence before your feet ever touched its stones, and it would hold this moment too, not as a test, not as a punishment, but as a welcome. Because sometimes the most sacred crossing is the one you don't rush. You took one step, not because you were ready, not because you had solved anything, but because stillness too can be a crossing. The bridge accepted you without celebration, without consequence. No shift in the wind, no change in the fog, no gate closing behind you, just moss beneath your feet, soft, forgiving. You expected something to change inside you when you stepped on the first stone, but instead, something changed outside you. The world didn't push, the trees didn't lean in, time didn't demand you finish. You were simply met by what had always been there, a bridge, a morning, a silence so soft it didn't need to be noticed to be real. You paused again, half on the bridge, half still in yesterday, and that's when you saw it. The marks from others, the faint imprints of those who came before you. Their stories had softened into the stones, not carved, not forced, just left behind, like steam that once rose from a morning bowl of tea. You bent down, traced one with your finger. You didn't know who they were, didn't know why they crossed, didn't know if they ever made it to the other side. But they had walked, and now so had you. Not because you felt ready, but because readiness isn't always a feeling. Sometimes it's a return, to trust, to breath, to a softness that doesn't need a destination to feel sacred. Halfway across, the fog grew thicker. You could no longer see where the bridge led. But it didn't matter, because you were learning what the monks meant when they said, "The path is not beneath your feet, it is within your step." You walked slowly, not to delay, not to savor, but because there was no need to rush something already holding you. You thought of all the deadlines you had missed in your life, the goals that slipped away, the people you lost because you weren't fast enough to heal or to speak or to stay. And yet, the bridge did not judge your pace. The bridge did not say, "You should have crossed years ago." It only offered itself again and again and again. It did not measure your worth in how quickly you reached the end. It measured nothing. It simply held space. And in that space, you began to breathe deeper. You thought of the times you rushed your grief, the times you tried to force forgiveness like it was a race, the times you told yourself you were behind. Behind who? Behind what? There is no clock in the soul, only presence, only now, only this step, this breath, this moss beneath your feet. At the far end of the bridge, a single lantern hung from an old wooden post. Its flame was small, steady, unhurried, as if to say, "I've been waiting, but not watching, and certainly not keeping time." You reached it and touched the post gently. It was damp with fog, worn by weather, but still standing, like you, not untouched, but still here. You looked back once, not out of regret, but to offer a bow to the part of you that stood waiting for so long. You did not scold them. You did not call them weak. You honored them because they waited with courage, and because they did not force a crossing before your heart was ready. Some bridges collapse when crossed too soon. Some hearts do too. So you stood there, at the end, not triumphant but whole. You hadn't conquered anything. You hadn't finished, but you had arrived, and not because you hurried, because you trusted that what is meant for you will wait without punishment. The monks say, even if you take 1,000 years, the gate will not shut. And now you believe them, because the bridge this patient, moss-covered companion never closed. Not when you were scared, not when you were still, not even now, as you step into the fog beyond it. It simply remains, soft, open, sacred, a silent vow carved into the earth. When you are ready, I will be here. And now, you walk forward, carried not by urgency, but by the quiet trust that nothing true will ever leave just because you waited. The rain had already begun by the time you arrived. Not a light drizzle, not a gentle mist, but the kind of downpour that blurred the line between sky and earth. The monastery stood quiet against the trembling trees. Its wooden beams, aged and bowed, held stillness like an old secret. Wind brushed past the prayer flags, but they did not panic. They fluttered like breath, not resisting, only dancing. You stepped into the entryway, feet soaked, heart louder than the rain. There was a time when you would have run for shelter, tucked your fears under your robe, and waited for the sky to change. But something in you now was different. The storm had come outside and inside, and still, you kept walking. Candlelight spilled from a small alcove just beyond the corridor. It shimmered across the stones like golden silence. Inside, a monk was sleeping, not meditating, not bowing, not bracing against the thunder, just sleeping, his robes wrapped gently around his still body, like clouds around a mountain, his face soft, untroubled. A single flame glowed beside him, its light dancing on the walls, but never waking him. You paused in the doorway, uncertain. How could anyone rest so deeply when the world was shaking? Didn't he hear the roof creak? Didn't he feel the lightning crack the sky open? Didn't he know what it was like to carry a storm beneath the ribs? But the longer you watched, the more you understood. He was not avoiding the storm. He simply knew he wasn't it. The monks teach. The storm makes sound, but silence remains. You had heard those words before, but now you saw them breathing, not in a scroll, not in a scripture, but in this man still as stone, alive as wind. Your own breath began to slow. You sat down beside the door, not inside, not outside, just near. The thunder cracked again, closer this time. The windows shivered in their frames. The flame flickered but did not die, and neither did he stir. What kind of peace sleeps in the presence of chaos? You listened to your own thoughts rattling inside you like wooden prayer wheels spun too fast. What if it gets worse? What if I break again? What if the roof caves in? But the monk slept on, his chest rising slowly, his hands resting lightly on his belly, as if even his body knew there was nothing to defend. You realized how much of your life had been lived on guard, waiting for the lightning, tensing for the fall, bracing even in calm, because peace had always felt too quiet to trust. But here, peace was not fragile. It was steady, not loud, not proud, but unshaken. And suddenly you were not afraid of the storm. You were afraid of how long you had mistaken yourself for thunder. You thought of all the nights you couldn't sleep, not because the world was ending, but because you believed you had to fix it before morning. You thought of the times you carried someone else's weather, trying to calm their sky before you even named your own. You thought of the quiet child you used to be, how even then you had learned to read the clouds before you ever read your own heart. But now, the candle was here, and so was the monk, and so were you, and the storm. It could rage if it needed to, because you were beginning to learn that peace doesn't mean the absence of sound. It means you no longer flinch when it comes. You stayed there long after your clothes had dried, and still he slept, not unaware, not withdrawn, but at rest in a truth you had only just begun to trust. What shakes around you does not have to shake within you. What rises in the sky does not have to rise in your soul. You do not need to match the volume of the world to be present in it. You are not the wind. You are not the thunder. You are the stillness that remains after it all passes. And in that stillness, you breathed deeper, not because the storm had ended, but because it no longer held you hostage. You looked once more at the monk's face, soft, lit by a flame that did not waver. He did not teach you with words. He taught you with sleep, with trust, with the quiet reminder that peace doesn't always have to be earned. Sometimes it just has to be remembered. The storm did not end. Not quickly, not with apology. It carried on through the folds of the mountain, through branches and rooftops and nerves. But inside the small monastery, the candle never went out, and the monk never stirred. You stayed there longer than you expected to, long enough for the thunder to become less foreign, long enough for the wind to sound less like warning and more like breath. For a while, you closed your eyes and matched your breathing to the rhythm of his. In, soft, out, slower still. The candle's light flickered on the walls like a memory not of what you'd lost, but of what had always been here beneath your trembling. You began to see that you'd spent so much of your life trying to control the weather, making peace conditional, chasing calm, managing chaos like a full-time job. You were always bracing, always listening for the next crack in the sky, the next breaking wave in your chest. But he, this monk, sleeping beside the storm, he knew something deeper. That stillness is not created. It's returned to. You don't build it. You uncover it. It doesn't need your help to exist, only your permission to be felt. The candle danced once as the wind moaned louder, but never went out. You understood then. The flame was not afraid of flickering. You had mistaken movement for danger. But trembling is not the same as breaking, and stillness is not the same as control. You opened your eyes again. The monk had turned slightly in his sleep, his hand now resting near the base of the candle. Still undisturbed, still whole. The storm was no longer outside you. It was just the sky doing what skies do. You listened, not for instruction but for presence, not for signs but for sound itself. And sound, you discovered, was not your enemy. It was just part of the rhythm of a world that had never once promised silence. You stood slowly. Your legs, at first, felt unsure, not from fear, but from the weight you had just laid down. A weight you didn't know you were carrying, until it was no longer yours. You bowed toward the monk. He did not see. He did not need to. Some offerings are made without witness. Some gratitude lives in the quiet act of walking away softer than when you arrived. You stepped back into the hallway. The rain was steady now, not violent, not fading, just present. You moved past the candlelit hall, past the wooden columns, past the ancient walls that had stood through storms greater than this one. And as you reached the outer threshold, you paused beneath the overhang, watching the world wash itself clean. You didn't rush into the rain. You didn't flinch at the sound. You stood still, not resisting, not needing to test your peace. It was enough to feel it. Right here, now. The monks say, do not chase the storm, and do not wait for it to pass. Just return to the seat of your own breath. And tonight, you felt the thunder again, farther now, but still real. And for the first time, it felt less like a warning and more like a lullaby, a sky rocking itself to sleep. You stepped into the rain, not to flee, not to prove anything, just to walk. The drops touched your skin like the first time you were ever held. Not judged, not asked to be ready, just welcomed. And the storm? It did not stop you. It did not follow you. It was simply allowed to exist. Like every thought you'd tried to silence, like every wave you'd tried to hold back, all of it now free to move through without anchoring in. You walked beneath a canopy of trees just beyond the monastery wall. Their leaves shimmered under the stormlight, not breaking, only listening. And you imagined the monk, still resting, still breathing beneath that single flame. His stillness had entered you, and it would not leave just because the rain did. You had learned that peace is not an escape from the world's noise. It is the sacred space you carry within it. A space where the storm does not define you. A space where sleep can come even when thunder is near. You were not empty. You were not exposed. You were not the wind, not the rain, not even the silence. You were the one who could hold them all without becoming them, and that was freedom. As you continued walking, the rain softened, the wind eased, but it didn't matter, because even if it returned, even if lightning struck again, you knew now what could not be touched. The candle, the stillness, the part of you that sleeps not in ignorance, but in trust. So let the skies shift, let the earth rumble, let the world be what it is. You are no longer waiting for calm. You have become the place it returns to. And the storm, it will pass. But you will remain. There is no sound when the lotus opens, no music, no celebration, no announcement to the world that something sacred is happening, and yet it does. One petal at a time, in its own rhythm, not rushed, not delayed, just ready when it is. You have lived much of your life measuring progress by motion, by how much you did, by how far you've come, by how many petals you could force to bloom before the sun set. But the lotus? It does not force anything. It waits. It listens. It rests between each unfurling, long silences between soft awakenings. And still, it is called beautiful, even in the pause, even in the moment when nothing seems to move. Tonight, you are that flower, not frozen, not finished, just between petals, just between moments of unfolding. The monks once told you, the greatest growth is often mistaken for stillness. You did not understand then, because your world rewards momentum, not waiting. It praises noise, not quiet. It claps for the bloom, not the silence that makes blooming possible. But nature has never rushed what matters. The moon does not hurry its rise. The tide does not panic when it pulls back. The tree does not apologize for the season when nothing grows. Why should you? You sat once in the monastery garden, watching a single lotus in the pond. It had been days. Each morning you returned, hoping to see more of it, more of its color, more of its shape, more of its becoming. But it did not bloom on command. It opened as it needed to, sometimes not at all. And in that pause, you began to see something you had missed. The silence was not emptiness. It was part of the ritual, a breath between the sacred, a stillness that nourished what the world could not see. You closed your eyes that morning, sat beside the flower, and matched your breathing to the still air around it. Inhale soft like the mist, exhale softer still, and for once, You stopped trying to grow. You allowed yourself to simply be. Like the flower, like the water, like the space between things. No direction, no urgency, only presence. Only this. You remembered then how many times you told yourself you were falling behind just because nothing was blooming. You judged the garden by how much it showed, not how deeply it rooted, but a lotus roots in the unseen. Its strength begins below the surface, in the dark, and so does yours. You may not see it, you may not feel it, but something in you is preparing. Some petals do not open quickly because they are waiting for the light to be gentle enough. Not every stage is loud. Not every healing makes noise. Some only whisper when you are still enough to hear them. The lotus did bloom, not all at once, not with fanfare, but quietly. One morning, you returned to the garden, and there it was, a full circle of light pink petals held open by stillness. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. And you knew the silence between yesterday and today was not wasted. It was holy. You knelt near the water, watching its reflection ripple. The bloom did not speak, but it offered you a knowing, that all growth has its silence, that all becoming is cradled by the unseen, and that maybe you were never behind. You were just in the sacred pause between one petal and the next. The monks speak of this space often. They call it the breath between arrivals, the space between inhale and exhale, between what was and what will be, between versions of you that are still deciding whether to stay or soften. This breath, this middle, is not nothing, it is everything. It is where your soul turns quietly toward light, before the body even knows how to follow. It is where fear loses its grip, because there's nothing left to chase. It is where grace gathers when there's nothing left to perform. You stood up from the pond and noticed something new. A single petal fallen from the lotus, resting gently on the surface of the water. It did not sink. It did not cling. It simply floated. Its life not over. Its purpose not gone. Just changed. And you saw yourself in it, not the blooming, but the letting go. The release of what had once been beauty into something even softer. Acceptance. You remembered all the times you tried to force a next chapter before you had honored the last line of the one before. You remembered how many times you held your breath between breakthroughs, as if the pause itself meant you had failed. But the petal reminded you, some pauses are not endings. They are sacred spaces where nothing is demanded and everything is allowed, including you, your not knowing, your quiet days, your soft confusion, your unfinished prayers, all of it, held gently like a petal resting in air. You reached out and let your fingers trail just above the water, not to disturb it, not to change anything, just to witness, to be near without control, to feel the soft invitation that life keeps offering when you finally stop trying to be impressive. And in that silence, a thought arose not from your mind, but from something older. That maybe the greatest wisdom is not in how you move, but in how you pause, how you wait without punishment, how you allow the in-between to be a place of presence, not pressure. You are not what you do, you are not what you finish, you are not how fast you bloom. You are the breath inside the seed, the silence between petals, the sacred space that waits for no praise and fears, no delay. Even the sun rests, even the stars take turns shining, even the earth, in its spinning, honors the shadow side. Why shouldn't you? You turned from the pond, ready to walk again, not because you were rushing forward, but because you no longer feared being still. You took one step as the morning wind carried the scent of open petals through the garden. It did not rush you, it only passed by. And you let it, because you knew now you are not behind, you are not late, you are simply breathing, and every breath, is a new blooming. No one sees a flower open, but the whole garden feels its presence when it does. And tonight, the garden will feel you too. Not because you arrived, but because you allowed yourself to be right here, between one sacred unfolding and the next. Somewhere in the monastery, between the candle room and the outer stone gate, there is a door with no handle, not locked, just resting in stillness, waiting to be opened only by those who stop needing answers. One morning, you asked the teacher a question you had held in your chest for years. When will I be done? You did not mean to say it aloud, but the silence was kind enough to listen. The teacher turned toward you without surprise. He did not laugh. He did not scold. He simply walked to the corner of the room and from an old shelf pulled down a scroll. Dust rose around it like soft incense, settling without sound. He brought it to you without explanation and placed it in your hands. The scroll was tied with faded red thread, worn, frayed, still strong. You untied it slowly, expecting pages, perhaps a final teaching, a map, a clear answer. But the scroll unraveled and unraveled and unraveled. It spilled across your lap, onto the floor, into the corridor, down the hallway like a ribbon of breath. Words marked the surface in ink so delicate they looked like they were still drying, and still no end. You looked up, confused. The teacher only nodded. You wanted to ask again, is this a joke? Is there a conclusion? But something in you was already starting to understand. The scroll did not end, because the path does not end. And that is not a punishment. It is a blessing. You have spent so much of your life waiting to arrive, searching for the moment when you would finally be complete. As if healing had a final page, as if awakening came with a ribbon and a certificate. But the scroll kept moving because you are still breathing, because each breath writes a new line, and each pause turns the page without turning away. You ran your fingers along the surface of the parchment. The ink was warm, as if the story was still being told in real time through your very presence. There were no chapters, no titles, only rhythm, soft curving script like water. Some lines were bold, others faint as if the writer had wept while writing them. You remembered your own days like that, the ones when you thought you had lost the way only to find you were still being carried by something older than direction. You looked again at the scroll unfolding toward the courtyard, its final edge nowhere in sight. And for the first time, you didn't need to chase it. You understood. The scroll is not meant to be finished. It is meant to be lived. You remembered something else the monks once whispered over evening tea. There is no graduation from presence, only deeper invitations to return. You are not a task to be completed. You are a scripture being written as you walk. And every sorrow, every still mourning, every unspoken forgiveness is a line the wind carries forward. Somewhere along the scroll, you noticed your own name, not written in letters, but in feeling. You could not read it aloud, but you felt it like a pulse in the paper, as if the scroll was not separate from you, as if you were the parchment and the ink and the hand that wrote it all at once. Time dissolved then. There was no early, no late, no behind, no ahead. Only this, the breath before knowing, the breath before needing, the breath before the next word writes itself, and you softly unrolling into forever. The scroll had no map, no instructions, no destination circled in red, only language that moved like breath, not to inform, but to remind. You sat beside it, noticing the breeze curling its edge, not tearing, not rushing, just letting it be read by the wind. It was then you remembered a boyhood story of a monk who reached enlightenment while sweeping fallen leaves. He swept every morning faithfully for years, and then, one morning, he stopped. He placed the broom down and smiled, not because the path was clean, but because he had finally stopped believing that it needed to be. The broom had not failed. The leaves had not disobeyed. He simply saw, the path goes on, and so will he. Like this scroll, it never ends. Even the paths you think are behind you keep echoing forward. A word spoken in kindness a decade ago still softens someone's grief this morning. A silence you held with grace still shields a heart that needed room to breathe. You are not only where you stand. You are where your love still lingers. You are where your stillness was once needed. You are the mark on pages you forgot you touched. And that means you cannot fail this path. Because the path is not a test. It is not a race. It is not a ladder. It is a scroll that moves with you, through you, because of you. You lean down, touching one of the scroll's many unfurled wings. It fluttered, not in resistance, but recognition, as if it knew you too, as if you had always been part of its story. The teacher, still watching in silence, finally spoke. A single line. "Turn it over." You hesitated. The scroll felt too sacred, too endless to question, but slowly, you flipped the edge nearest you. The underside was blank, pure, unwritten, waiting. Your heart didn't race. It quieted, because suddenly you understood. The scroll was yours now, not as a burden, but as a gift. A sacred reminder that what comes next is not scripted. You are allowed to keep writing, with gentleness, with forgiveness, with pauses. Not every line must be profound. Not every stroke must be straight. You may write crooked. You may rest your hand. You may set the scroll down and return to it in another season. There is no monk tallying your wisdom. There is no judge counting how many petals you've turned. There is only the wind, eager to carry whatever truth you are brave enough to set down. And if all you ever write on the remaining space is silence, that too will be sacred. You let the scroll remain open, its tail now stretching beyond the courtyard, folding gently into the moss. Not finished, but whole. You bowed your head to no one in particular, not to the teacher, not to the sky, only to the truth you had forgotten. You were never late. You were never lost. You were simply standing on a line still being written. And in this chapter, there is no final page. Only a breath that keeps becoming ink. Only a scroll that keeps listening. Only a story that keeps you gently unfolding. There is a stone ledge just outside the northern wall of the monastery. Few notice it. Fewer sit there. It does not face the sunrise. It does not overlook the river. It does not offer a view that stirs poetry or prayer, but it is where a bird once landed, and everything changed. You were younger then, heart still loud, mind still reaching, waiting for the return of something you could not name. A love, a word, a reason, a song. You did not know which, only that something had flown away from you in silence. And every day, you waited for it to come back with noise, with closure, with explanation, with the sound of wings making things right again. You sat on the stone longer than you meant to. Some mornings, your breath was the only movement in the cold air. Some nights, you mistook the wind for the sound of return, but nothing came, and you began to wonder if the absence itself was the answer, that some things don't circle back, some goodbyes don't bring apology, some endings never explain themselves. And then one morning, you didn't go to the stone for answers. You just went, because it had become your place to sit. The place where you didn't have to be anyone, where your grief could breathe without being asked to hurry, where your questions could live without needing to be solved. You brought no offerings, no poems, no expectations, just presence. And that was the day the bird returned. You didn't hear it. No flutter, no cry, no triumphant signal, just a soft shift in the air behind you. When you turned, it was already there, a small bird, feathers the color of wet ash, perched on the same stone you had filled with waiting. It did not sing. It did not even look at you. It just landed. And in that moment, you understood something no one had ever told you. Some healing doesn't arrive like an answer. It returns like a presence. Quiet, unannounced, already here. You didn't cry. Not because the pain was gone, but because the need for sound had left. You no longer needed a reason for what had left you. You no longer needed the old ache to speak. The bird stayed for a moment that felt like hours. It blinked once, tilted its head, then looked out into the fog. You did too. Together you faced the emptiness without needing to fill it. Not all songs are sung. Some are felt in the silence between wing beats. You remembered how many times you thought healing would look like music, a dramatic return, a final act of forgiveness, a closing line. But here was the closing you never expected. No words, no answers. Just a bird on a stone beside a person who no longer needed to ask why. Sometimes peace is not what arrives. It's what stops needing to. You never touched the bird, never moved closer. Its nearness was enough. And when it lifted again and flew into the mist, it left behind no feathers, no sign, no promise. Just air soft and unbroken. Just silence now filled with something you couldn't name, but no longer feared. You looked down at the ledge you had once claimed as your vigil. It was the same stone, but you were different. You had not received what you once begged for, but you had received something gentler. A return that did not explain. A presence that did not perform. A silence that did not punish. You stood slowly, brushing the edge of your robe, and bowed not to the bird, but to the lesson it had carried back without sound. That not everything that returns will return loudly. That closure is not always a sentence. Sometimes it's the space between your thoughts that no longer clings. Sometimes it's the moment you stop needing to be held because you realize you already are. You walked back through the stone path, leaving the ledge behind. You would visit again perhaps, but not to wait, just to be. And the silence that had once felt like an ache now followed you like breath, soft, whole, and without question. Some birds return, not to speak, not to sing, only to remind you that healing, like flight, needs no announcement, only space. And you are that space now. The soundlessness that holds what once hurt, the quiet that no longer waits to be filled, the presence that has learned to welcome return without needing to know why. And if the bird never comes again, that will be peace, too. There was a wooden door at the back of the monastery, a quiet one, rarely touched, facing a distant snow-capped mountain. It opened to nothing. No road, no travelers, only wind. And yet, one monk returned to it every morning. He would open the door as the sun began to rise, and he would sit, still, silent, watching, not waiting, just watching. The others whispered about him. Some said he had lost someone. Others believed he was still hoping for something to return. But the monk never answered, because it wasn't about return, it was about reverence. He didn't speak to the mountain. He didn't ask for signs. He just faced it as if by holding his gaze there, he could offer peace to whatever had once passed through that door and never come back. The wind would sometimes stir his robe. Snow would fall gently in the far distance, but the monk remained unmoved. You once asked him, "Why do you sit here when nothing changes?" He looked at you with eyes that had cried without needing to explain, and he said, "Because some doors were never meant to be closed, only respected." You didn't understand it then. You thought healing meant shutting everything that hurt. You believed peace required forgetting. You wanted him to turn away, to move on, to stop facing something that never called back. But years passed. Your own grief grew legs. Your own heart weathered its share of leaving. And one morning, you found yourself drawn to that same door. The mountain stood still, blanketed in white silence, unreachable, unmoving, and yet something in you softened as you gazed, because finally you understood. Looking back doesn't mean you're trapped. Facing the pain is not the same as feeding it. Sometimes it is the highest act of love to look at what once hurt you and not demand that it come back to comfort you. You sat where the monk once sat. He was gone now, no ceremony, no farewell. Only his stillness left behind in the wood grain. You traced the doorframe with your hand. It was smooth, worn by time, like a heart that had stopped expecting but never stopped loving. And that is what made it holy. You remembered how many doors you had slammed shut in the name of moving on. How many rooms you locked behind you because the air held too much memory. How many names you tried to forget because they hurt more than they healed. But this door, it taught a different kind of strength. The kind that stays open without longing, that grieves without self-pity, that remembers without needing to repeat. A sacred kind of remembering. You watched the clouds curl around the mountain's peak. There were no answers, no signs. Only a presence too vast to hold and too gentle to ignore. You thought of all the people you never got to explain yourself to, all the moments you wish you could rewrite, all the closings that never came with sound, and you let the door receive them, not to fix, not to undo, but to witness. The mountain did not move, but neither did you, and somehow that was enough. You could feel the difference now between needing someone back and loving them, even if they never return. Between closing a chapter and honoring it with every silent morning breath. You no longer needed closure that came with punctuation. This door had shown you how to carry grief without letting it bend your spine, how to bow to what left without letting it steal what remained. Even the air felt different when you stopped needing healing to look a certain way. You sat longer than you meant to. You were not waiting for someone. You were remembering who you had been when they left, and forgiving that version of you for not knowing how to let go gently. You stood, finally, and did not close the door. You didn't need to. The wind would pass through it when needed. The light would return when it was time. And if someday something crossed that threshold again, you would be here, not as someone broken, not as someone waiting, but as someone who now understands. A door left open can be an altar. A gaze held steady can be a prayer. A mountain can be a mirror of the silence you are learning to carry. You bowed again, this time to the absence, to the pain, to the ache that taught you to keep your heart unlocked. And as you walked away, you did not look back with hope. You looked back with reverence. Some things are not meant to return, but they are always welcome in your stillness. And you are no longer the one who demands sound before you listen. You are the door now, and you know exactly how to remain open without breaking. You arrived before dawn, barefoot and out of breath, holding a question that had followed you through every season of seeking. Where is the temple? You had passed rivers, climbed paths carved into the ribs of the earth, spoken to beggars, priests, and trees. All had pointed onward, until at last you found the master. He was old but not heavy. His robe hung like smoke around his frame. He sat on a flat stone beneath an open sky, watching the morning become light. And when you asked, breathless and urgent, "Where is the temple?" he smiled without moving, and pointed upward. You followed his hand to the sky, empty, vast, without bell, altar, or roof. "No," you said. "I mean the temple." He didn't correct you, didn't explain, just stood slowly and swept his arm around the clearing. A stone floor, an altar carved from a single piece of cedar. A line of wind chimes hung between two crooked trees. That was all. No walls, no ceiling, no doors, and still something sacred stirred in your chest. It was quiet, not the silence of absence, but of presence too full to speak. The master stepped forward and knelt beside the altar. "This is the temple," he said, his voice softer than birdsong. You looked around again. "But it has no walls." He nodded. "Exactly. You had spent so long believing holiness lived only in what was built, protected, contained. You thought the divine required boundaries, incense, brick, rule. But here, with sky for a roof and breath for a bell, you felt something you'd never felt inside stone halls. Freedom. The kind that did not ask for permission to be sacred. The kind that belonged to no structure, only to the stillness willing to kneel in it. You sat beside the master, watching as light touched the altar without needing to pass through windows. No filter, no glass, just sun meeting wood like an old friend. "How long has this been here?" you asked. "Forever," he said. "Even before the altar was carved, even before the stone was flat." You blinked. "But how could a temple exist before it was made?" He turned his gaze to you. "The same way peace exists before it's felt. The same way love exists before it's named. The same way you existed before you knew who you were." The breeze moved through the trees. The chimes sang without rhythm or conductor. You looked at your hands. They were not folded, not purified, not performing, and still they felt like prayer. You had been taught that the sacred required effort, chanting, postures, devotion. But here, you were not asked to prove anything. Not to yourself, not to the sky, not to the master beside you. And still you belonged. A thought rose in you, small, daring. Could this mean everything is the temple? The master smiled. Not everything. Your heart sank slightly. Only everything that's seen with reverence. He continued. Otherwise, it is just a rock, just a breath, just another morning. You breathed in slowly. The trees shifted again. The light deepened on the floor. You realized then that walls had never been the problem. It was what you had left outside them that created the distance. You had left your grief at the door, your confusion, your longing, because no one told you they could be holy too. But in this temple, this open, roofless space, nothing was unwelcome. There was no threshold to cross, no cleansing to perform, only arriving, only presence. You remembered someone once telling you the soul is a bowl that cannot be filled until it is cracked wide open. This place, this floor, this sky, it was the crack. And through it, everything could enter. Everything could be held. You turned to the master again. What if I forget this? What if I return to places where the walls are thick and the rules are loud? He placed his hand on your chest. Then build the temple here, he said, in your breath, in how you listen, in how you walk, in how you forgive. His hand remained warm and still. Let the sacred be something you carry, not something you seek. You closed your eyes. The wind passed over your skin like a robe you hadn't known you were wearing. The altar behind you made no sound, but its silence was a scripture you could almost remember. You felt the floor beneath you. It did not judge your posture, it only received. And you knew you would leave this place. You would return to roofs and rules and roles, but you would not forget. You would not forget that the most holy temple was not made of stone. It was made of attention, of soft eyes, of an unclenched heart, of a breath that does not rush. You stood slowly. The chimes rang once more, not for you, but with you. You bowed to the altar, to the sky, to the wind, to the part of you that had finally stopped asking, "Where is it?" Because now you knew. It is wherever you decide to kneel with love. It is wherever you remember that nothing must be perfect to be sacred. It is wherever you stop building walls between yourself and what already is. And as you walked away, there was no threshold to cross. Only the wide open world, suddenly full of temples. It was a quiet afternoon in the smallest room of the monastery. No prayers were spoken here. No teachings were given. Just brooms, books, and folded robes. A room of care. A room for tending. You were asked to sweep. Not because it was dirty, but because that's what the body does when the soul needs to let go of control. You held the broom with quiet hands. The floor creaked like an old friend, and as you swept, you noticed the dust rise in the sunbeam that cut across the wooden floor. It moved like memory, not fast, not in protest, just released. You stopped. The broom rested against your leg as you watched the particles suspended in light. Dust, so small, so surrendered. It did not panic. It did not try to settle faster. It floated, trusting that it would find the ground in time. A thought passed through you like a wind too gentle to disturb. Everything you were holding might settle even if you let go. You blinked. Something shifted, because you'd spent your whole life trying to keep things from falling apart, trying to be the thread that held the room, the relationship, the story together. You thought love meant catching the dust before it landed. That peace meant keeping everything in place. You swept again, but slower now. Each stroke was no longer a task but a release, letting what rose become light, letting what fell become rest. You remembered all the nights you held people with your silence, your answers, your invisible presence. You remembered how you tried to carry what no one saw but you. The unspoken fears, the subtle chaos, the blame that never belonged to you but always found your name. And now a shaft of sunlight filled with weightless dust was teaching you something no one had said out loud. You do not have to hold it all for the world to keep spinning. You do not have to sweep up every sorrow before the room feels worthy of stillness. Even dust settles without your permission. Even mess makes its way home. You sat down on the smooth wooden floor, watching the sun inch slowly toward the edge of the window. The dust kept dancing. Some fell. Some floated longer. All of it found its place eventually, and so will you. You don't have to direct everything. You don't have to understand every twist of the story to let it unfold. You don't have to be the glue that holds this chapter together. You can be the one who breathes, the one who lets go before things are perfectly clean, the one who knows that stillness is not the same as control. Somewhere inside you, an ache loosened, not all at once, but enough. Enough to notice how much energy you had been spending trying to make everything okay for everyone. Enough to ask, what if the dust of your past does not need to be erased? What if your pain does not need fixing before you rest? What if everything you've been gripping has already found its place without needing your hands to keep it from falling? The broom lay beside you now. It did not mind being still. Neither did the dust. Neither did the floor. The monastery did not collapse because you paused. The world outside the window did not spin out of orbit because you sat. And suddenly, you could see it clearly. Your rest was not irresponsibility. It was reverence. It was trust in the way things settle when you stop trying to command them. Even grief finds a place to land when you stop pushing it away. Even love reforms when you stop holding so tightly. Even the mind will grow quiet when you stop shouting at it to be still. You looked again at the particles in the sun. Each one a little story you no longer had to carry. Each one a weight you were allowed to set down. You didn't need to organize the past like a library. You didn't need to label every feeling before you let it pass. You were allowed to let it swirl, to let it drift, to let it be. Somewhere far down the hall, a bell rang once, not calling you, just echoing. You rose. Not because it was time, but because you were ready. You bowed to the room, to the dust, to the broom, to the light that had revealed just enough to let you rest. And as you walked away, you did not look back to check if the dust had settled completely, because now you knew it would. It always does. And you are no longer the one who must stay awake just to keep the sky from falling. You can sleep before the room is perfect. You can breathe before the story ends. You can let the dust settle without needing to sweep every corner of your soul. This is your permission to not hold it all, to not fix it all, to not carry it all. Let what drifts, drift. Let what rests, rest. You've done enough for now, and the light will hold what you no longer need to. Long before the stars emerged, before the monks gathered in silence, there was only the fire and the drum beside it. Not played, just placed. Its wooden body rested on a folded cloth. Its skin stretched like breath, held in the chest, waiting, but not rushed. You sat nearby, watching the flames curl upward, the shadows dance across its shape. The old drummer hadn't returned yet, only the drum. It did not speak, it did not stir, but still it taught. Not with rhythm, but with rest. You had always thought music meant motion. That sound was the sacred part, that the beat was what gave the drum its soul. But tonight, something else began to emerge. The fire crackled softly beside it, and in that stillness, you began to hear the other half of every song, the space between, the hush between strikes, the echo after each call, the waiting. That space was never empty. It held the weight of all that had come before, and all that had not yet arrived. You leaned closer. The drum had been struck many times over the years, but now, in its silence, you could feel its full presence. Not depleted, not forgotten, just resting. You touched its rim gently. It was warm, as if it remembered the hands that once played it. And you thought of your own rhythm, how long you had moved without pause, without breath, without letting the silence speak back. You'd spent years believing you had to keep going, keep giving, keep striking the surface just to be heard. You called that persistence, but sometimes it was panic. Sometimes you were just afraid that if you stopped, everything would disappear. That you would disappear. But the drum, it remained sacred even when untouched. Its power was not in the volume, it was in the waiting. You remembered the old drummer once said, "The most powerful strike is the one that follows silence." And now you understood. Without space, there is no rhythm. Without stillness, there is no music. You closed your eyes. Inside you, there was a beat that hadn't been heard in years, because it had no room, no breath, no silence to echo in. You felt it now, soft, patient, asking nothing of you but presence. You stayed still. The fire beside you shifted its shape. The embers spoke in crackles. But the drum, it listened. And in that listening, there was something holy. You saw your own life in the rhythm you'd tried to force. Wake up, work, fix, prove, try again. Strike after strike after strike. No rest, no room. You called it discipline. But perhaps it was fear in disguise. The fear of what might rise in the quiet. The memories, the longing, the ache you never gave time to breathe. But now here with the drum unplayed beside a fire, you felt it. Rest is not weakness. Rest is the silence that turns sound into meaning. Without rest, you cannot feel. Without rest, you cannot hear your own heart between the noise. The old drummer returned. He did not speak. He bowed to the drum, to the fire, to you. Then he sat. He waited, not for performance, but for rhythm to arrive. He struck once, then paused. The sound rang out like the wind in a bell. Then silence. Then again a single strike, a breath, another. You could feel it. The drum was not speaking. It was conversing, with space, with stillness, with you. Each pause was as sacred as the sound itself. Each moment of waiting was a form of trust. You closed your eyes again. Inside you, the rhythm softened. You no longer needed to beat yourself into progress. You no longer needed to fill every moment with effort. You remembered how much life unfolds in the spaces you leave untouched, how healing seeps in when you stop grasping, how love often speaks in the quiet between words. The drummer played on, soft, unhurried, like someone who knew the soul responds best when not commanded. You breathed with the rhythm, and for the first time in years, you were not counting the beats, you were resting inside them. You did not need to prove you were still here. You simply were. The fire began to dim, the stars thickened above, and the drummer stopped. Not abruptly, not with finality, just let go. The drum fell silent again, but not empty. You understood now silence was not the absence of sound. It was the return to source, to center, to something deeper than the noise of trying. The drummer turned to you as if reading your thoughts. He smiled and said softly, "The drum does not forget you because you stop playing. Neither does life, neither does love, neither does the world you've tried so hard to hold together. Let it breathe, let it rest. Let there be a beat of stillness between all your striving, so that when you return, you strike with soul, not exhaustion." The fire gave its last breath of light. The drum waited beside it, content. And you had learned how to listen to the space between your own steps. You rose slowly, and as you walked away, you did not need the rhythm to follow you, because now the silence walked with you too. There was once a vine that spent its life wrapped around an old stone wall. It began as a single green tendril, barely visible against the grey. At first, the wall was everything, a place to lean, a place to climb, a place to belong. It felt safe. The stone was solid, predictable, unmoving. The vine wrapped tighter, clinging, weaving itself into the cracks, believing this was love to be held by something that did not change. But seasons passed. The wall began to crumble, not all at once, just little pieces. A chip here, a widening fracture there. Still, the vine held on. It believed its purpose was to keep the wall from falling apart, that if it wrapped itself just right, if it grew strong enough, tight enough, the wall might remain whole. But vines are not meant to be keepers of stone, and love is not a rope. One morning, after a long rain, the vine looked up. Its newest tendrils had grown beyond the wall's edge, reaching towards something else. Sky. There it was. Open. Endless. Unstructured. It frightened the vine. There was nothing to hold up there, no crevice to cling to, no certainty, just space and light. But the vine didn't retreat. Not this time. It stilled, listened, and in the hush of that moment, a truth whispered through its roots. You are not what you hold. You are what reaches. That day, for the first time, the vine loosened. Not all of itself, just one small coil. It let a single leaf fall away from the stone. It didn't collapse. The wall did not mourn. The sky did not scold. Everything simply remained. But something within the vine shifted. It began to see that its identity was not bound to the thing it grew around. That it could still be a vine, still be beautiful, alive, enough without gripping so tightly to what once felt like purpose. It didn't mean the wall was wrong. The wall had given shape, shelter, direction. But the vine had confused support with self, had mistaken proximity for belonging. And so it climbed not over, not away, but beyond. Each morning, new leaves unfolded in open air. No stone beneath them, no script, just sky, and the soft bravery of becoming. And now you sit here in your own quiet place, remembering what you've wrapped yourself around. The people, the stories, the roles, the walls you once needed. Some gave you safety, some gave you shape. Some simply stood still when everything else moved. But there comes a moment when the clinging no longer feels like connection, only fear. There comes a moment when you must ask, is this still holding me? Or am I the only one holding? You are allowed to loosen, to let your identity unfurl from the structures you've mistaken for self. You are allowed to grow in directions that no longer trace the past, even if they don't look like what love used to look like, even if they lead into space you cannot name. You are not betraying the wall. You are honoring the sky. Because freedom does not always begin with flight. Sometimes it begins with a quiet unfurling, a single leaf choosing sunlight over certainty, a single heart choosing breath over bondage. You have been so loyal to the shape you first found yourself in, but you are not that shape. You are not the crack you wrapped around. You are not the role you became good at. You are not the caretaker of ruins. You are life. And life moves, sometimes away, sometimes upward, sometimes into places no one else can follow. You may not know what holds you next, but the sky has never failed to hold the wind. And you are made of that same softness. Let go where you are only grasping. Stay where you are still growing. Not all walls need abandoning, but not all deserve your roots. Some things were never meant to hold you, only to show you how far you can reach. Let this be your season of loosening. Let this be your invitation to wrap around light instead of stone, to grow without justification, to rise without asking if it's okay. You were never meant to carry the wall. You were always meant to carry yourself, and you still can, even now, especially now. So breathe. Let go, not from anger, not from pride, but from softness, from the sacred knowing that you are no longer required to cling in order to matter. You are still a vine even when unwrapped, still a soul even when unattached, still becoming, still held, not by the stone, but by something wider, wiser, and waiting. The path to the shrine was overgrown. Moss pressed through the old stones, vines laced through forgotten steps. The door had not been opened in years, and still you walked there, not to enter, not to beg, not even to understand, only to bow. You carried no offerings, no incense, only memory, and a soft ache that no longer needed fixing. This shrine was not made of wood and nails. It was shaped from moments you once believed would undo you. The day they left, the thing you never said, the version of you you now hold with gentler eyes. You had tried to close that door many times, with silence, with anger, with logic, but the shrine stayed, because the past does not ask to be buried, only blessed. And so you stood before it now. The wind barely moved, a petal drifted from an unseen branch, and your hands came together. Gasso, the simplest form of reverence, the softest shape of surrender, palms touching, fingers pointing upward, arms relaxed, spine straight. You bowed, not to worship, not to erase, but to honor what no longer holds you but once did. The door before you did not open. It didn't need to. It had already done its work. You remembered how much effort it once took to carry that version of yourself, the one who was always proving, always apologizing, always waiting to feel like enough. And now, you could look back without reaching. You could love what hurt without reliving it. Because peace is not the absence of memory, but the gentleness that follows when the memory no longer rules you. There are things you will never forget, but that doesn't mean they still own your voice. There are names you will never call again, but that doesn't mean they must vanish from your breath. There are places you will never return to, but that doesn't mean you must curse the road that took you there. You can bow without needing to go back. You can say goodbye without turning away in pain. You can place your hands together and bless even the chapters that broke you open, especially those, because they taught you what holding feels like, even if it was only your own hands clasped in the dark. You stood longer than you meant to, but time felt different here. Not heavy, not fast, just still. You noticed the worn wood of the shrine door, the cracks, the quiet. It was not as fearsome as you once remembered. There was no voice shouting your shame from the past, only the sound of your own breath arriving unpunished. That is how you know you've healed. When the past feels like a room you no longer live in but can visit without weeping, you bowed once more. And this time, your eyes closed not from sorrow, but from peace, the kind that comes when nothing is being fixed, when nothing is being run from, the kind that arises when you know you no longer need to hold anything tightly, not even forgiveness, because some wounds don't need to be rewritten, only released. Some stories don't need correction, only closure. Some versions of you deserve nothing more and nothing less than a single breath and a silent bow. You stood, hands falling softly to your sides. The shrine remained unchanged, but something inside you was different now. The doorway no longer felt like a test, the memory no longer a burden. You had offered your presence to the past, not to rekindle, not to justify, just to say, I remember, I release, I remain. And that is enough. The walk back was quieter than the walk in, because some part of you had been waiting to bow for a long, long time. And now that you had there was space again where holding used to be, not emptiness, but openness, not numbness, but clarity, the kind that arrives when the hands stop building and begin listening. You may never forget the things you've bowed to, but you will never again be ruled by them. This is the sacred middle ground, where the past is not exiled but honored, where your younger self is not erased but embraced from a safe distance, where the door stays closed but the love remains. You do not have to hate what hurt you. You do not have to justify what you used to believe. You do not have to grip the lesson so tightly that it strangles the peace that wants to arrive. The memory is not the enemy, only the weight you placed on it. So now, when you think back, let your hands meet softly. Let your body bend, not in defeat, but in reverence. Let the shrine door remain closed, and let that be okay. Some prayers are whispered after the fire goes out. Some healing is simply not turning away. And some peace comes when the hands have bowed to everything and nothing at all. It was mourning, the kind of mourning where everything moves slowly, not from tiredness, but from peace, the kind of quiet that doesn't need to prove itself. You stood on the temple steps, bare feet pressed against the wood, watching the sky. It was not dramatic, no storm, no fire in the clouds, no message written in light. Just one white cloud, drifting, soft as breath, distant as memory. It wasn't even large, barely shaped, the kind of cloud you wouldn't have noticed on another day. But today, you watched it, and somehow it became everything. It moved with no urgency, no need to impress, no wish to linger. Just one moment here, then another, further away. You kept your gaze on it, like watching an old friend walk down a long path without turning back. Part of you expected it might circle back, that the wind would shift, or the sky would change, or something would make it return. But it didn't. It simply faded, softly, fully, without apology. And for once, you didn't chase it. You didn't grip your thoughts or try to name what it symbolized. You didn't cry out, or wish you'd said something sooner. You just stood, hands by your side, heart still, and let it go without running after it. There are things that don't come back, words unsaid, people who drift, versions of yourself that dissolve into seasons you've outgrown. And sometimes, peace is not in what stays, but in finally accepting what doesn't. You have waited so long for return, waited for closure, for a knock on the door, for an answer you thought would untangle the ache you carried alone. But today, the cloud left, and you didn't follow, and that was enough. There was no sound to mark its leaving, no ending score, no ceremony, just space. A wide open sky where something once was, and the deep breath that arrived in its place. You realize something. Not all endings are violent. Not all departures need explanation. Not all absence is abandonment. Some things simply complete themselves. And your only task is to notice that you are still here, still breathing, still whole. Even in the hush of goodbye, that cloud had no intention of being watched. It didn't know you were there, didn't write its departure into your story. And yet, it gave you what years of seeking hadn't: permission to stop waiting, to stop wondering if closure would knock, to stop holding the door open for something that has already walked into its own horizon. You may still think of it, whatever it is for you, a name, a season, a version of yourself you thought would last longer. You may still dream of it from time to time. That's okay, but you no longer need to pause your life in its shadow. You no longer need to keep vigil for a return that was never promised. There is wisdom in letting things leave, even if they left quietly, even if they left without giving you the words you thought you needed. The silence is its own kind of answer, and it says, you can stop waiting now. You can rest in what is still here. The wind, the light, the sky with room for something new. There is a peace that only arrives after the cloud is gone, not because it returns, but because you no longer need it to. You are not the one who was left. You are the one who stood still and softened when the leaving was complete. You are the sky, not the shape that passed through it, and the sky never mourns its own openness. The monks say everything that comes must go, but they also say nothing truly disappears. It only changes form. That cloud, it became part of the air you now breathe, part of the softness in your lungs, part of the stillness in your chest. It did not vanish. It transformed. And so have you. You are not who you were when the cloud arrived. You are someone who can love without holding, grieve without bitterness, and let go without closing your heart. Look up. There's room again, not because you filled it, but because you didn't. The peace you feel is not emptiness. It's release. The cloud never returned, and maybe neither will the thing you still think about when the sky turns quiet. But now, you know what to do. You let it fade, you bow to its shape, and you turn toward whatever sky remains. Because this vast, gentle quiet you now feel is not what was lost. It's what was waiting to arrive when you were ready to stop chasing what had already become the wind. There is a room deep within the monastery that no one speaks of often, not because it's hidden, not because it's forbidden, but because once you enter it there is nothing more to say. It is not large, not ornate, not lined with relics or wisdom scrolls, only a small mat, a candle, half burned, and breath, held like silence between soft hands. You arrive there not by seeking, not by force, but by releasing everything you thought would lead you here. The questions, the wounds, the need to arrive. They fall away, not in shame, but in gentleness, as if the door only opens when you stop needing to be let in. You don't remember how you found it. Maybe you wandered too long. Maybe you let the map slip from your fingers and simply followed the light. Either way, you are here now, in the room where nothing is missing. At first, you look around for something, a scroll, a statue, a phrase etched on the wall to hold like a lantern, but there is none. Only the candle and your breath. The rest is space, not empty but whole. You sit, not because you were told to, not because it's the right thing, but because your legs stop searching for direction. You exhale, and something inside your ribs unclenches. The monks say there is a moment in every path where striving stops. Not because you have reached perfection, but because you have stopped trying to become something you already are. This is that moment. You are not here to finish anything. You are not here to understand everything. You are here to see that you were never missing from your own life, only distracted by the parts you thought were incomplete. There is a peace that arrives not when something is fixed, but when nothing needs to be. It feels like the soft click of a door that never locked, finally being noticed. You touch nothing, you name nothing, you explain nothing, because here in this quiet room you are finally allowed to just be. No story, no memory, no performance of healing, just you, and that is enough. The candle flickers but does not die. It does not call for attention. It does not cry to be witnessed. It simply is. And somehow, that teaches you more than any teaching ever could. Because if the flame can live like this, without proving its glow, so can you. You've carried so many stories of who you had to become, of what you needed to shed, of what still needed releasing before you could feel whole. But now in this soft silence, none of it follows you. Not because you denied it, but because it no longer holds weight. The story keeps telling itself, but you no longer need to believe every word. You are the space beneath the telling. You are the stillness between the thoughts. You are the room that has never needed renovation. There is nothing missing. Even your pain had a place. Even your failures left warmth in their wake. Even your longing was sacred, because it led you here, to this room, to this breath, to this moment of no longer needing to do. There is no final chant, no ritual to close, no gong to mark completion, only the slow inhale and the slower release. Only the knowing that you are already within the peace you were chasing. You've always been held, even when you didn't know, not by something outside you, but by the space that never moved, never left, never asked you to be anything more than exactly this. You let your shoulders fall, let your jaw rest, let your hands settle like leaves on still water, and the thought arises softly, this is it, not the beginning, not the end, just the room where nothing has ever been missing, where your soul was never late, where your healing was never behind, where your presence was always enough. The candle glows, your breath grows quieter than thought, and the world outside this room does not vanish. But it no longer pulls, because now you know you can return here whenever you forget, not as escape but as remembering. This is your room, not built by walls, not guarded by monks, but found in the still place beneath your noise. The room that waits for no permission, the room that knows you are whole, even when you forget, even when you fall, especially then. You remain in the stillness, not asleep, not seeking, just breathing in the knowing that nothing has ever been missing, not in you, not in this path, not in the silence. You are already home. There is no sound now, only breath. And something softer than breath, a stillness that does not ask anything of you. You do not have to answer. You do not have to understand. You are not being tested, not anymore. This is not a gate to pass through. This is not a lesson to memorize. This is not the edge of anything. It is what was always beneath you, even while you walked, even while you wept, even while you doubted whether you'd ever find your way back. The monk stands beside you. They do not speak. Their robes are light against the wind, and their hands are warm from prayer held in silence for years before you arrived. You are lying down. You don't remember when you laid your body down, but it feels like it has been waiting to be still for a long time. No one tells you to sleep. No one tells you to stay awake. You are simply allowed to be here, however you are. The monk kneels and slowly places their hand over your heart, not to fix it, not to bless it, but to acknowledge that it has always known what your mind forgot, that you are already held. The silence in the room is not empty. It wraps itself around you like a shawl that has been stitched by every moment you thought you were alone. But you weren't. You were being carried by the breeze, by the unseen hands of time, by the soft voice you kept hearing in dreams but never knew how to trust. Until now. This is not the end. This is not goodbye. This is the great unclenching, the release of everything that thought it needed to hold on to survive. Now, you are just breath, just presence, just being. The monk says nothing, but if you could give shape to what is shared in this silence, it would be, you've done enough. You are enough. You may rest now. The hand remains on your chest a little while longer, not to awaken you, but to remind your bones that they are sacred just as they are. You begin to forget what you were searching for, and strangely, it feels like a kind of remembering, the kind that only comes when all the noise has fallen away. You are not falling asleep, you are falling into the place where the wind hums but never disrupts, where grief becomes mist that waters a new garden, where your name is not lost but no longer needed. The monk stands again. Their hand leaves your chest like a leaf drifting from a branch that no longer needs it, and in that letting go, nothing is lost. Only silence remains. But this silence is not hollow. It cradles. It echoes your pulse not back to you, but forward into something wide and holy and eternal. The monk walks away. They do not look back, because they know you are not behind. You are here now. You are inside the stillness that once felt so far away. There is nothing more to wait for, nothing more to say, nothing more to try. You have arrived, not at a temple, not at an answer, but at the center of something that has no edge. You are no longer gripping, no longer chasing, no longer wondering if you're allowed to stop. You have stopped, and the world did not end. It opened. The silence stays. It does not rush you. It does not close the door. It becomes the room itself. And you become part of it. A breath, inside a breath, inside the great inhale of all things returning to peace. No more footsteps, no more fire, no more searching. Only this moment, this stillness, this sacred breath that does not ask to be earned. It only asks to be received. So receive it now, not with effort, not with hope, with nothing. And in that nothing, you will find everything.